Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm your MC V. Rajesh Kumar, Group Manager, Infosys Data Privacy Office. I welcome you all again today and trust everyone is doing well and safe in the midst of this great pandemic. I'm super excited to have you all at the Privacy Symposium 2021, a maiden event which is organized by Infosys Data Privacy Office in collaboration with International Association of Privacy Professionals. IAPP needs no introduction, but still will be privileged to talk few words. IAPP is the largest and the most comprehensive global information privacy community and a resource. Founded in 2000, the IAPP is not-for-profit organization that helps define, promote, and improve the privacy profession globally. To talk a little about Infosys Data Privacy Office, was set up in 2010 as an independent unit within the Infosys group under the leadership of Srinivas Pusarla, who is the Global Chief Privacy Officer. The team comprises of a mix of professionals from diverse backgrounds such as law, information security, risk management, quality, technology, specialist, delivery, and corporate strategy folks. The Global Chief Privacy Officer of Infosys reports to the group CEO, who is also a member of the board. So last 2 days was quite interesting with 8 topics covered across themes on generic nature and AI and data ethics. And the session saw almost 8 sessions with 19 speakers who are esteemed senior leaders in this community. Today, the final day of the Privacy Symposium, the theme of our session is on privacy and privacy engineering, which will be covered in the next 4 sessions and with 9 esteemed panel of speakers. I'm sure we are looking forward to all the amazing conversation and insights. So before we begin duly, let me remind you a few things again. For the participants joining through your broadcast, you can see 2 icons on the bottom right side of the screen. One is for the chat window and another one is for the help desk. Any questions you would like the speakers to address can be typed on the Q&A tab. Depending on the time left, we will do our best to have them responded during the session. Chat icon can be used to input your thoughts on the topic. Do not type any personal or sensitive personal information on either of these options. These sessions will be recorded and will be made available. For IAPP members and other members associated with other associations, you will be eligible for CPE credits. Let's start with our interesting set of sessions for today. As the COVID pandemic takes its terrible toll in both human life and livelihoods, governments, public health authorities, companies, and individuals have responded with extraordinary measures. These measures have changed the way how it has impacted each one of us, including the way how personal data such as health data are collected and processed, some of the limits on personal movements, and the need also for constant tracking and reporting for better governance. In case of business organizations providing services to clients and workplace closed and employees working from home, that is extending the IT operations to remote services, where end employee uses unsecured devices and internet communications with lower protection levels than those maintained in the corporate or institutional networks. The authorities across the globe have come up with several guidances on measures that needs to be in place to mitigate any such privacy risk, not only from an employer's obligation to employees, but also towards how client data will be processed in such environment. So the next topic is privacy during pandemic and the new normal. The moderator of the session needs no introduction, as you have been seeing him on and off the sessions for the past 2 days. Yes, you guessed it right. Let me take this opportunity to introduce myself in brief. I claim some amount of self-publicity to talk about myself. I am part of the Infosys Data Privacy Office, and I've also been part and served as the board of IAPP Asia Advisory Board, and currently serving on the IAPP board as part of the Training Advisory and Indian Advisory Group. So next, let us call our esteemed panel members. So I would like to call upon Pam Dixon, Executive Director of World Privacy Forum. Pam is a founder and Executive Director of the World Privacy Forum, a public interest research group known for its data governance and privacy research and analysis. Dixon has written groundbreaking work in the area of health, artificial intelligence, identity, development, and data governance. She also serves as a delegate for the OECD, the most recently on the AI experts group, among other multilateral work in the area of data governance. I'd like to call upon other panel member, Maria Shara Azori, Head Group Data Privacy Policy of Novartis International AG. She leads a team of senior privacy professionals that defines group-wide data privacy standards and provide guidance across all business functions on the responsible use of data and the interpretation and implementation of privacy provisions. Maria is a qualified Italian attorney and holds an MBA from the Edinburgh Business School. It's a pleasure to have you both on the session. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Maria, for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you.
So let us go. So you've seen the context. So let us directly go on to the questions in the interest of all the audiences and the time that we have. So, Maria, just my first question is to you. Based on this new scenario and what we have learned from the pandemic about the main drivers for innovation in the healthcare space, what would you consider as a priority from a privacy perspective going forward in order to continue to support and to enable this kind of innovation while preserving privacy rights of individuals?
Wow, what a question to start with. And this is really a great question. I mean, the situation and the emergency that we faced with the pandemic, I think really showed us how innovation in this space, in the healthcare space, so a key space, can really happen very fast. So what was that brought this kind of fast happening innovation is basically two elements, and one is so the fact that we were able to collect big amount of data actually, and here of course I imagine the questions related to individual privacy that can come in mind of all of us, and I will be happy to answer to and to explain how all this happened, and on the other way also we were shown how collaboration is important, is a key driver of innovation and collaboration that happens at all levels of the healthcare ecosystem. So collaboration among scientists, but also all other level of healthcare ecosystem. So, and collaboration that happens across borders. So I think these are really the key learning for speed up innovation and maintain it's also sustainable. We need a lot of data, high quality of data, and this collection has to happen in the full respect of individuals' rights. And we need collaboration at all levels of the healthcare ecosystem and across borders. So at where we stand right now, I see that we miss, I think, the level of harmonization at many levels that we need to maintain this level of innovation sustainable. So I think we will need to reconsider many things, to work together, regulators, industry, and society at all, to really harmonize our systems. And also here we need to rethink the way how on what we base this collection of big data. What is the basis? How this can happen without harming individuals? So I would say these are the main learnings and the key discussion that we need to bring up now in society is the best moment to do that.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'll just get back to you on that in a second. Meanwhile, Pam, I just wanted to check from you. The pandemic seems to have a very long-term changes to the work culture. And let me just do a little bit of a mix-up here. So there's a lot of changes to the work culture, and a lot of white-collar jobs seems to be permanently moving to work-from-home modes. This increases the visibility into resource productivity and utilization, but which may also trigger remote monitoring, some of which will be very intrusive in nature from a privacy perspective. We see a good number of players are already in this market offering such solutions. How do you see organizations are meeting this challenge? To take control of the productivity on the one side and not violate the privacy on the other side. And if you are interested to have this concept of a little bit of a comparative analysis between the way how US would think or how the EU would think, I think that would also add some much more value to that.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So that's, of course, a really challenging question, so thank you. It's the right question to be asking right now. So we're seeing a very wide variety of responses, and some of them are going to need to be addressed. So I'd say for white-collar workers, it's very competitive right now. Companies are just reeling from the shock of the pandemic. Most companies were forced to, make very abrupt, sudden changes to their workflows, not understanding that it would go on for 1, maybe 2 years, or perhaps in some cases even more. And already we are in a situation where workplaces have closed for many white-collar workplaces have closed for a year or more. And that old science of, well, if you do something for, so many months, it becomes a habit. We are well beyond that point now. People are habituated to working from home, and there are going to be pluses and minuses, and it's a very complex situation for women in the workplace who have children at home, especially small children in the toddler range. Working from home may be very, very challenging, and they may be very much looking forward to going back into the office and just paying for daycare and something like that. It's going to vary profoundly by the individual, whether there's childcare duties, and also the space in the home. We're seeing very significant differences between people who are living in urban settings and people who are living in rural settings. So in the United States, in particular, I know that there's been an exodus from what I call very expensive tier 1 cities and states to much more affordable cities and states. So, for example, a lot of people in California have moved out of California and have moved to places like Florida and Texas, Arizona, Idaho, places you wouldn't normally see a high-tech worker moving, right? But this is the new normal. So I do think that all of those considerations are super important. But in terms of privacy, for a white-collar worker, privacy is a competitive item. So if you start to monitor white-collar workers extensively from home, I do think that there would be some real destruction of trust. And also, I do think there would be people within that workforce that would seek other employment where that was not happening. But here is one of the disparities that we really need to think about culturally. People who are not white-collar workers, people who perhaps are part of the gig economy and are doing, maybe it's call center work that is just on a gig level. I do think that the monitoring will be more intensive at this level because you're dealing with customer calls and customer interactions. So we do have a difference in how people are being treated with their privacy depending on the level of their employment. And we need to think about this a lot more because we need to be inclusive in who gets privacy in this world. It can't just go to the wealthiest people and the wealthiest nations.
It's great. May would like to add something onto that, specifically on those monitoring tools and stuff. What is your perspective of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with what Pam said. So we need to be very careful. There are also other aspects to consider. I understand companies that want also to collect data to know how better reorganize, let's say after the pandemic, to reorganize a workplace that really fits the new needs. and wants to understand, of course, how many employees will come back, what they wish, and maybe if we go even to the more sensitive part, understand more about the well-being of employees, because you can be as much as a company, a productive company, if your workforce is healthy, right? So, but I'm fully convinced that this can be done without going into the details of the individual identity, right? That can be done in an aggregate anonymous format. So this shouldn't be that difficult. There are maybe other aspects related, for example, to the transition time. We will start slowly to come back to the office. Questions related to vaccination campaign or tests campaign, how much a company can ask to their employees, and how much shall or are they allowed or not to collect in this sense, or to impose. And here, of course, the scenario is quite complex, because there are also, in certain cases, quasi-legal obligations, right, to do that. But one have to look at the local law scenario to organize this transition time. What I actually say we all should be very careful with is, and very much aware of, is that information collected under certain circumstances of emergency, of transition, of under a certain specific context, cannot be then reused in other contexts with other purposes. So this is, I think, we need to be particularly protective towards our employees. As Pam said, absolutely, the trust of our workforce is key for an healthy, productive environment, right?
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, that being the core, it's really great. That's a valuable insight, and I'm sure the employers, the organizations, or action, and specifically where such request comes from the client-related engagements, the service providers who needs to extend the same requirement. It's a very challenging position. So now back, Pam, so this pandemic has required a compelling need for public authorities in the several countries. And the two through organizations enforce the use of certain apps, which helps in containing spread of such disease, track these, and effective reporting. So when most regulations treat health data as a very sensitive personal information, or in the European context, we call it as a special categories of data, such data collections may be legitimate for protecting the vital interests of the people, as well as a society at a large. But do you think these changes would have been triggered through emergency powers, that the laws that they have locally in terms of to amend these regulations to permit such collections and processing, or is it a quick patch work that probably authorities are kind of looking into take control over such pandemic?
Yes, I thank you for your question. I think we have a real situation here with this issue. I'm going to go back to the question you just asked, Maria. And, it all starts with this issue of employers. Employers are in some ways the linchpin of this in many ways. In the US, you really wouldn't be able to you wouldn't be able to ask employees specifics about, their general health. That would have to be handled very differently. And then for all of the European Union, member states, and then the 164 jurisdictions that have those kinds of laws or very similar laws, it's a very, very touchy territory. That being said, if you look literally across the world, most jurisdictions are operating on some form of emergency footing. And let me give you a great example from the US. So in the US, the the vaccine is owned by the US government. Every dose of the vaccine is literally owned by the US government until it goes into a person's arm. So because the vaccine is under an emergency use authorization, the rules for how the privacy of the vaccine information is handled does not come under our health privacy law, HIPAA. It comes under the FDA/CDC. So there is a committee that issued rules that stated that no one who is giving the vaccine, no vaccine partner, such as a drugstore or et cetera, can utilize a patient information for any commercial purposes whatsoever. And that just came down a few weeks ago in May. So everyone is playing catch up here. But this is the kind of catch up we're going to need to make from wherever it can possibly come from, even if it is a unique channel that may go away. I think it's important to place, especially commercial marketing restrictions on the use of pandemic-related data, because everyone has had to rush to get vaccines out, rush to help people live through these various surges. It's been more important to save lives. And so at this time, as jurisdictions and countries are coming out of a wave, then people will put in protections, and then another wave may lock things down, and then things will come back, and then more protections are added. And I think we're going to be doing this for some time going forward. But eventually, we're going to need to stop and really take stock of what data did we collect here globally, not just in our countries, but globally. What are the data sets that are being made available in aggregate form? And there are actually quite a few of them already. And then what do we need to do going forward so that in the next emergency, we can have some kind of globally harmonized response to this data question and have standards in place and procedures in place so that we don't have these kind of, running catch up kinds of problems.
That's great. So the quick jumping here on the in terms of the accelerated drug trials for COVID, I think probably Miriam, I would leave it to you how you wanted to take this question. So in the need for accelerated drug trials for COVID, how was the data subject privacy taken care? And do you think that privacy took a hit due to paucity of time to deploy appropriate de-identification techniques while being able to correlate the patient data with outcomes? So how privacy policies are used to comply with transparent norms in such scenarios?
Yeah, maybe I could take this question. It's actually a great question, and it's really following what was said at the beginning already. So we saw these two main drivers, right, of innovation under the COVID pandemic. So the set of data that we could collect and the collaboration among scientists. So, and these also happening across borders, right, at all levels of the healthcare ecosystem. So, but this does not, in principle, require a research in the healthcare space. Does not, in principle, require the identification of the individual. So, patients, we are interested in the patient, but in the patient as a part of a population, right? A part then of a population included in the certain data set to which we derive our conclusions that are important for research. So what do we need to do in general, but this is really in general, is to protect the individual in general from harm. And what are here the main concerns? So harm in terms of could be stigma, discrimination, or identity theft as well, right? We need to ensure that research is done for a legitimate, so it is a legitimate health research, so that the data that we have, the data sets are used for a legitimate health research and also for making healthcare systems more sustainable. And then we need to use all the available safeguards. And I would really emphasize the sector already operate continuously in continuity based on professional confidentiality obligations, that there are here review of each and every project by ethic boards, pseudonymization, and in addition, what is really key also to complete the picture is the accountability of companies. So these all should give patients the trust in this system and how it works. It works research in the healthcare space. So, and here a last word on accountability. Novartis, like other companies, pharmaceutical companies in this space, they implement internal policies. In our case, we clearly, part of our principles, we have the legitimate and meaningful collection of data and the minimal retention here. And this is how we really complement this already strong set of safeguard existing for this sector of the industry, and completed with our accountability. So this is the way how we ensure that really the research that we do is a legitimate health research and doesn't harm the individual.
Would you like to add anything to the same question that I posed on with Miriam? It's something which you feel that would ignite some more debate and discussion around that topic?
Yes, look, I think this is a really critical topic for all of us to tackle, and we should start right away. So there's a couple of things. One of the things that I've really noticed about data and the pandemic, so a couple of things. Let me start with three very big things. So the first one is data standardization. If you really look at the World Health Organization, and I serve on one of the data governance subcommittees at the WHO, and one of the things you see just right away is that we have actually a global need for health data to ease this pandemic. There's no pandemic in any one country, it's everywhere. So everywhere we have to have appropriate data sets coming from everywhere. So we really need the data. But here's the thing, with our modern data ecosystems, the zeros and the ones aren't very forgiving. We cannot feed it paper, it has to be digital, right? So what we are really seeing is a lot of different data formats, a lot of different input formats. It can be a fax, it can be a phone call, a text, all sorts of other formats. It might even just be, a voice file, you never know. But it would really be very important for all of us to ensure that we have as many standards as we need that are inclusive of all jurisdictions, not just the global north, but the global south, the global north, all jurisdictions agreeing on standards that can be utilized by all, that will help us harmonize the global data flows through to the multilateral organizations like WHO, so that there can be some kind of coordinating function. Now, I know that not everyone agrees with this kind of coordination, and that's fine, but we do need to have standards that will really help us with all of this. The second thing I would say is AI and big data. We need to make sure that this analysis, as Maria just mentioned, is done for public health purposes. That's it. There should be a way of providing accountability for this data use, because we do need the data. And then the third thing is a lot of national legislatures have broad exclusions to privacy and even to security in emergency times. The US has this, Europe has this, India has it, most countries have this, right? You have to get through the pandemic. It would be really important going forward to find a center position. What's too much protection? What's too little? Where's the center line? Are there specific protections we could build and craft for emergency uses? So it's not an all or nothing scenario. So those would be my feedbacks.
Great. You want to add, Maria? You want to add?
Yeah, if I may add just a few last consideration on exactly on what Pam right now said. It's really important. We still need to build this cultural environment for the data sharing. We still need the infrastructure, because we need the infrastructure to process this kind of data but has to be really clean, high quality of data, interoperable, and also really accessible and diverse as much as possible to include all the population. And here I just would like to emphasize why we cannot base this collection on consent, because consent practically introduce upfront a bias that doesn't allow us to include the diverse population that we need to include for understanding how a disease works, spread, affect individuals. If we base this on consent, the consequence is that research will be joined by those that are really interested in that kind of research, will leave the other out, and will create in the end discrimination.
The consent is one of the biggest concerns. A lot of privacy officers are not in a position to do certain things. There's a huge limitation around it. I think I think you hit the bullseye, and that's one of the key issue which we would like to see some kind of regulatory guidelines and other things. Even possibly next regulatory updates could also have an amendment around that. I think this pandemic would definitely give certain insights for certain make of changes. It's just not the technology evolution that allows for a change in regulations. I think these are supposed to be some of the other factors that should help in the evolution of this regulation, keeping in pace with the larger community in scope. So now, since you mentioned about the consent, and this is one of the biggest problems of all the data protection officers. So I just wanted to check with you, do you think that this pandemic has an impact also on the DPO role in a company? And if yes, how do you see his role evolving? And how do you envisage to manage the new kind of questions arising in this context of this new normal? I mean, new processes, new technologies coming in. Even implementing a DLP tool used to be a problem, but now implementing tools to monitor the employees while working from home, and lot many such evolution that's technology growth that is happening. And how is that something? This question is to either of you. Please, and both of you can take your turns to respond on this.
Shall I? Maybe I will start, Pam. So I would say that the role of the privacy officer changed dramatically in the last years, but during this last one in particular, and also in our environment, I'm part of the pharmaceutical environment, right? And here I see really the role also of as an harmonizing force of the privacy officer, because we have so many competing regulations in this sector, so many competing, not only regulation, sectorial regulation, but also different scenarios in privacy laws around the globe that follow let's say a different data philosophy, right? More on the consumer protection in the US, more on the fundamental rights in Europe, more on the taking care of and social harmony and harmonization and interest also in opportunities that are coming up in Asia. So different philosophy to combine and different piece of legislation and quite strict regulations with competing provisions. And then really we are faced with new questions also, as you mentioned, on with our workforce, absolutely in this new environment, but in particular on the side of research. There are many questions also coming from ethic boards that we have. So it's the privacy officer from a person, a bit a professional, a bit on the side, has become really the enabler of, I would say also the digital strategy of a company and in general the harmonizer for whom is working on a global scale in particular.
That's great, Maria. Well, Pam, over to you, Pam. So your quick viewpoints on that.
Oh, so just very quickly, I think that there's a lot of work to do for DPOs right now. Data protection officers within companies have profound compliance duties. But I do think in addition to the compliance duties they already have, there's a really important role for more collaboration between competitors actually within sectors. So for example, within the pharmaceutical industry, I could envision for example, a multi-stakeholder work group of all the DPOs imagining together what might be really good rules that they could utilize, because national legislatures may not have the bandwidth to come up with any rules. So under GDPR and under many of the countries that have recently passed data protection laws, there is a way for those companies to do a code of conduct under the auspices of the regional or national data protection authority. And in this way, they could craft jointly with all of the stakeholders, including end users, what those kinds of rules may look like. And, you know, a good exemplar here is the Information Commissioner's Office in both Mauritius, Africa, and also the Information Commissioner's Office in London, excuse me, for heaven's sakes, in the UK, forgive me, London on the brain. And both of them have done really wonderful codes, but this could be done by industry as well, and I do think that would be great. The other thing would be research. You know, for many years, for about 20 years now, there's been a real global struggle. It's not any one country, it's all the countries are having problems with, okay, how do you balance these new inflows of data with research parameters and ethics? It's actually a really difficult thing. The Nuremberg Code for medical research, human subject research ethics is extremely important. And that comes out differently in different countries. In the US, we call it the common rule, but it's really in most countries, you know, rules around how to conduct medical research safely. But in an era of big data, we need to craft additional rules, because if we're using a lot of aggregate data, are there rules that we need to have in place for that? And I would say, yes, we do. And let me give you just one small example. Let's say that, you know, someone goes off and wants a more complete socioeconomic context for a data set. And so they purchase some data to fill out a person's, you know, maybe socioeconomic status. Well, how do we know what the quality of that secondary data set is? Now we've merged it into a primary data set with high accuracy. What is the final accuracy of any given data set? And what were the feeder systems of information that went into it? And I think all of these are really important as we move forward in a very new environment.
Great insight, Pam. So in the interest of, I think we just have 2 minutes left. So this is one single question. I think this is something which I've seen in most across and many panels. a question which I can put forth. Either one of you can take it up and probably give some kind of an insight to the audience who had asked for this. So we understand that Fortune companies have the leverage and bandwidth in terms of resource availability for taking course corrections during difficult times. What is your inputs to MSME organization, middle and small, medium industries, especially the board members regarding these privacy initiatives that will ensure the compliance and also act as a business differentiator? Anybody would like to take that question and probably give some kind of an?
I can start on that. So right now, look, I'm not concerned about the super wealthy countries and super wealthy companies. I'm most concerned about the lower and middle income countries and the disparities there, as well as the mom and pop businesses and all the way up until the small and medium enterprises. I think we have to be very careful to not apply the same standards. I think that if we adopt a way of analyzing privacy challenges and security challenges, data governance challenges from a principles level, and then start to work with stakeholders and colleagues in similar businesses to yours, even if it's in another country, but start to talk to people about the resources that they use and what they're doing. But I also would go back to the idea of talking to customers, seeing what the customers value. You've got to really do a lot of this work, and it can be done very softly and gently. Now's the time, though, because we've come through really the huge emergency phase of the pandemic, and there will be waves and very serious situations in countries for quite some time. But in the interim, when there's not an absolute crisis going on, it's super important to start really taking stock and having multi-stakeholder conversations about this and looking at resources. I hope that's helpful.
That's great. So let me take this opportunity and thanking you both again, Pam, Miriam, for wonderful insights. And this is quite an interesting topic. The topic specifically on consent is not something that you can have it over a discussion. I think it needs a larger much forum of larger much views. Thanks again for being here and providing your valuable experiences as part of valuable insights to the audiences. Thank you again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now to our next session, the topic is on privacy engineering design and evaluation. So the privacy related risk are becoming more and more present in our everyday life as more and more data is being automatically created and as our life has taken on a digital shape. In addition, analytical tools have become much more powerful and enable unprecedented understanding of individual actions and behavior. So data has become the new oil or the new currency, as you may call for, and has become the power that moves the machinery of the internet and the web. The data-centric business models have proven to be very successful, resulting into more and more incentives to collect and process personal data. So privacy engineering is one kind of a methodology which tries to bridge those gaps between the laws on the one end and the principles of and technologies on the other end, and foster a new concept and apply to a day-to-day operations by organizations. It's a discipline that provides a systematic and engineering compatible approach to implement a concept like privacy by design, rather than using an ad hoc approach on just having a checklist item of do's and don'ts. So without wasting any more time, I would like to call upon our next speaker, who will be moderating the entire panel discussion with esteemed speakers from the industries, a mix of senior leaders in the industry, and they'll provide valuable insights for the audiences to take away at the end of the session. So then Victoria van Roosman has a solid technical background with a decade of practical experience in information technology, data protection, and privacy. She's also the data protection officer as well as the chief information security officer for Gusto, an all-in-one social media management product, ranked #1 in Netherlands. She's responsible for the entire information security and privacy governance there. She's an ambassador of ISACA's She Leads Tech program and also serves as the IAPP Training Advisory Board member. Victoria holds various industry certifications, speaks at information security and data privacy conferences across Europe, and participates in working groups of new industry standards and materials, such as the NIST Privacy Framework and EDPB guidelines. In 2019, she was recognized among 200 individuals in Europe for making significant contributions to the security and privacy sector. Victoria is passionate about technology, including its ever-promising possibilities and opportunities. Yet, simultaneously, she also foresees its potential adverse effects and isn't afraid to call out any devil that lingers in the details. Committed to enabling a safer future, Victoria is determined to power technological advancements and benefits with proper controls. So I would like Victoria to take over the session and introduce the panel members for the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Rajesh. I'm so happy to be here and to be moderating this session on privacy engineering design and evaluation, where I'm joined with some amazing speakers. So in no particular order, I would like you to introduce to Khaled El Imam. He is a professor at the University of Ottawa and CEO of Replica Analytics. Khaled has a background in engineering and computer science. His current work focus is developing data synthesis technologies and applying them to generate non-identifiable data, to enable and accelerate data with access to data for secondary analysis, such as AI and machine learning. For the last 2 decades, he has been helping companies globally implement different types of privacy-enhancing technologies. Then Jason Kronk. He is a seasoned privacy engineer, author of the IAPP textbook Strategic Privacy by Design, and holds CIPT, CIPM, CIPP US, and FIP designations. His unique background includes various entrepreneurial pursuits, strong IT and cybersecurity experience, and privacy law. Currently, Jason serves as a co-chair of the ISSA Privacy Specialist Interest Group and is a member of the IAPP's Privacy Engineering Section Advisory Board. He's also president and principal consultant with boutique firm Anti-Privacy Consulting Group and chair of the newly forming Institute of Operational Privacy Design. He also can be found on Twitter at Privacy Maverick. Then we have next up Lisa Bobbitt, CISSP, CIPN, CIPPE, and CDPSE. She is a Cisco principal engineer, architecting privacy engineering across Cisco's products, services, and enterprise. Lisa is passionate about embedding privacy awareness, governance, and technology by building on the foundation of years of working in mainframe connectivity, mobile routing protocols, innovative concepts in 3D, voice, video, data, and event management, government adaptation of commercial offers, embedded trust anchors, secure development life cycles, and privacy. She believes everyone as a digital citizen should be a privacy advocate by first understanding the value of authorized use of our personally identifiable information, and then applying controls to de-risk the potential harms to themselves and others. Then last but not least, Prasad Joshi. He is a senior vice president and head of Infosys Center for Emerging Technology Solutions, also known as ISETS. ISETS is a key unit within Infosys, responsible for building expertise in emerging technologies and contextualizing them to create business solutions for Infosys clients. Prasad has been instrumental in building strategic Living Labs program at ISETS, and through it has set up co-creation labs with key clients. His portfolio includes AI and cognitive solutions, blockchain, design and experience, AR, VR, and cybersecurity and data management. Under Prasad's leadership, ISETS has created products for live enterprise application management, cybersecurity, digital customer service, conversational interfaces, data privacy, enterprise gamification, and location-based solutions, among other areas. As part of Global Charter, he leads the creation of startup ecosystems and academia relationships. So I guess you all can feel confident we are surrounded by some experts on this topic. So before we begin the panel, I just want to inform you that I aim to reserve like 10 minutes for questions at the end, but you are more than encouraged to ask questions during the panel, so I may already throw in a few. So how are you guys doing today? Looking forward to the session?
Yes.
Well, let's just kick it off. So Jason, we don't hear the term privacy engineering as often as privacy by design. Could you tell us what the difference is?
Sure. Thanks, Victoria. So first, in terms of popularity, I think Ann Kabukian, who is speaking later today, has really popularized the term for the last decade of privacy by design. So I think that's, in terms of why you hear it more often, I think that's the reason. I do want to disabuse people of the notion of what privacy by design is, because I see a lot of confusion in the market. First, it's not compliance by design. So if you're talking about compliance with privacy laws, that's not what privacy by design is. It's also not this kind of fuzzy, high-level, do more privacy in your organization. It's actually more of a deliberative, systematic process to build privacy into your products, services, or business processes. Now, the ultimate goal there is that you will be more compliant with, most of the laws, because they have a lot of things in common with regards to privacy, but you're not looking at specific laws in order to build it in. Privacy by design can be considered a form of privacy engineering, I think, if you look at it, systems engineering. So you're developing your entire system, your ecosystem around your product, service, or business process in a privacy-friendly way. Privacy engineering actually probably encompasses a larger scope of things, because you're looking more at specific problems and designing specific solutions. It can be that systems engineering approach, or it can be about database engineering release mechanisms like differential privacy. But I want people to also not confuse it with just this kind of data engineering, because you could be looking at usability of user interfaces. Are you manipulating users and interfering with their autonomy and their self-determination? Are you doing other things? So it's not just about data. Privacy engineering can be any of these multiple subtopics.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jason. I know some people really also consider, privacy engineering more as the implementation step of privacy by design. How do you feel about it?
No, I think that's right. So from privacy by design, you're doing a systems engineering approach, a design approach of what are you designing from a high level, and what privacy concerns are you addressing, and then building in. It's like, okay, well, we have a problem right here. How do we address that one problem? Engineer a solution. Again, either database engineering, or it could be a problem people don't understand what they're agreeing to, and we need to, do usability studies and any kind of scientific approach to approaching a problem involving privacy. And so I absolutely agree that it's more about implementation at a lower level than the overall design.
Okay, thank you so much for your inputs. So, I do kind of wonder, what do we actually have to gain from privacy engineering itself? Prasad, could you perhaps tell us more why privacy engineering is or should be of value?
Love to. Thanks, Victoria. And it's a privilege to be in such a nice company around on the screen, as well as those of us who are listening, watching us. I'll start from where I think Jason started. That is, it's about engineering overall, and it's not about a particular law or a particular country or a particular aspect of privacy. It's all about moving it in. And to me, privacy is a complicated matter. It can have tones of culture, it can have tones of legal compliance, laws. It can have a sense of opportunity and a fear of breach. All of that sort of sits within the role. I will take who I am as a sort of to share my perspectives per se. I'm a technologist and a software engineer. Any problem that I face, I look at it with this lens of, can I apply my software engineer mind and see what can be done? I love culture, but I'm also afraid of the law. So it's sort of in between. So best to stick with the engineering perspective. And when you teed up privacy engineering, I love the notion of privacy by design. And then I do analogies that how did I learn software engineering? Software engineering is somewhat similar. We have seen so many cartoons that say that somebody wanted a simple swing hung on a branch. And then what eventually ended up is an extremely complicated structure. And software engineering attempts to avoid such gaps, issues, problems, communications. And in many ways, if I can draw that analogy of software requirements to software engineering and delivered artifacts, which makes systems run, in many ways, the privacy by design, analogously speaking, is like the object-oriented techniques, that it prescribes what it needs to do, how it takes you to the level of detail you can feel comfortable that my design is working out and has given a strong element of first-class presence for privacy and security in that sense. And then it comes the question of translating it, bringing in processes, bringing in methods, guidelines, checklists, and bringing it closer to software development or systems development per se. Surely there are options about what does culture mean. For example, those who are now possibly 25 to 30 years old, Facebook is culture. Talk to anyone who lived through the US elections and several years of what we have seen. It's a nightmare. It's not a culture, but that's the dichotomy that we're going to deal with, and we'll have to work with it in terms of educating ourselves, in terms of techniques of engineering, and bringing it in terms of how do I apply, how do I evolve, and make it fair and square center of how we build systems. If we can achieve that, then privacy engineering starts to deliver its value or work it in that manner. Where we take it from being reactive to proactive. I'm not saying the DPOs are of that type. I think the DPO organizations have done a fantastic job, and I interact with my DPO so often, Rajesh, Srini, they are all listening, that we have learned so much from them and applied and made it first class. In the small team that I tend to lead, we have made this first class as part of our software engineering approach. And that's where the elements of privacy engineering start to bring in the value, makes it proactive. There are elements of software engineering that make it predictable, repeatable, measurable. Whatever you measure, you can always improve it. That is the approach that I think needs to reflect into privacy engineering and make it first class in that sense. There's a lot of progress that has already happened. I think Jason was alluding to it when he referred to privacy engineering as a concept that we see. But let me look at what a systems developer or software engineer does. He tends to still see privacy as a method of audit. I have built my application, it's ready to go out. I'm so excited to release, but DPO is not letting me release it. It's an audit mindset that they take it. Why not change that? Why not bring in the elements of the engineering principles that software engineers are very used to? When they take requirements and they draw their diagrams, they use tools, they use coding guidelines, they have checklists of what to do. They have the non-functional requirements addressed in a certain manner. And for that as well, there are techniques by which we can evolve things. Privacy is not really very different as far as software engineering is concerned. It's a set of requirements that we need to embed in the process to make sure that software is privacy compliant, and not just compliant. That's probably an older term. It's engineered to respect privacy. It's engineered to make privacy first class, just like we talk about usability, just like we talk about simplicity, just like we talk about elegance. And that to me is the why or the value sense behind what brings privacy engineering to the fore. And more we do this, more will be the trust in systems, stronger will be the upside that we can generate from data centricity and AI and the elements that we bring in. There is also a strong element of culture associated with it, and that's part of the education change management that will have to be brought in. Engineering may not solve every problem. I have a very, very strong sort of a sentiment around how India's Arogya Setu, which was the COVID app that became so hugely successful. And I've been involved in building a set of applications here in US where I live in the early days of the pandemic. And there was a miserable failure, including the 2 operating systems on mobile devices, which didn't really do a whole lot in terms of being able to offer technology and engineering solutions that can be brought in. And to me, in my experience, privacy or the role of privacy or how these were engineered or worked in is where we had a failure issue. And there was, of course, a culture in terms of what India can do in terms of or the value sense in the country versus the American value sense. So that's my sense, Victoria, that we need engineering approach or evolve our techniques where they become first class in programming. And that's what privacy engineering will give us, that bring it to the fore, where just like software engineering, privacy engineering makes it easy and a feature of the software and not an audit or a compliance method or a law that I'm trying to comply with, kind of an approach that we tend to take as software engineers.
Thank you so much for your explanation. I totally agree. You know, the value is in really understanding what the idea is behind it, not because some law or someone says we have to do this, but really understand the context and the value that we're trying to deliver with the product that you're creating. So Lisa, you are this hands-on woman. Can you tell us, how do you embed privacy engineering in your processes, and how do you keep it on top of mind? Do you have any do's or don'ts that you could share with us?
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. The work that we have done at Cisco has really allowed me to embed our privacy engineering on top of our security engineering. We already had a secure development lifecycle that we've been working with for over 15 years. And so when I read, actually, I got excited about privacy because it let me bring the people part onto this secure baseline and really start looking at us as people and make sure that our technology was going to protect me as a person, be fair, do the things that we did, but we had to do it at a risk level. We couldn't do it as we can't just say, yes, here's the compliance, but we had to really look at it as a risk, because it really builds in trust. And what we focus on is not just security, but privacy and trust. We need to be able to trust, and it's put the foundation in place for us to actually move into these new technologies that we'll probably talk about a little bit later on, like AI/ML or IoT, or all these things that are bringing big data into our space. But what we've been able to do is really look at it, come up with the baseline of our policy by trying to pull everything into that are worldwide, so we can get a bandwidth or a bar that says, here's what we need to do as a company. And then in turn, make those controls that, as Prasad was explaining, we put at the very beginning, we put them as requirements, and our teams then put them into their backlog for their agile work, and they work through them. And we do that as a risk-based analysis for them. We look at what kind of market they're looking at, where they're going to run, and we build it through just like any other set of requirements for their product. And what that allows us to do is then be very focused on, okay, now, yes, we can check mark for some of the certifications, but what we truly can do is then be transparent about what we've done with customers' data, and in turn be able to answer things quickly. We've been able to prove, but with some of our surveying, that it takes a lot less time for our customers to look at our product and say, yes, I can use this, because we've put out a privacy sheet, because we show where our data is being processed and how we're processing it and who the third parties are. So building up that engineering that allows us to push it through the full cycle has been really an important piece of this. But the very first thing, as you just were saying, is how do I get people to believe in this? And so we've been able to actually go in and we've done training. We have an internal conference that we put all of our security, privacy, and other things that we focus on for trustworthiness into an environment, and bring in our engineers and really help them understand all the new things that are going on, how they work together, how they may make things harder to make a decision because one versus the other during a risk statement, and really let them start thinking about it in that way. And then we go ongoing around the year of putting up groups and communities to teach them, to keep them up to speed. And then we also have an internal training process that has all of the data where they can go back We also reach out to things like IAPP to keep building up that skill set. And then these types of conferences we're talking about, so that they can see it's not just us at Cisco doing it, but this is a global requirement and that they can take advantage of it. And what's been exciting for us is that we've actually been able to build up like the skill sets in different teams as they realized, oh, I've got personal data that I'm processing, or I'm making decisions for people in my product. I really need to build up my own set of privacy skills. So the Chief Privacy Office, which is what I'm in, doesn't have to just be the little silo within the company, but we're actually, as one of my directors that works with, we're spreading it out. Everyone's becoming a privacy engineer kind of statement. And we're excited about it. And the only other piece I'd like to make it really sure for people to understand, for a privacy engineer to work at Cisco, we really need executive buy-in. And we actually have had our CEO in 2019 say privacy is a human right, and we have to build it in, and our customers really require it. So if you get that buy-in from the very top and you build it from the very bottom by having our engineers understand the value of it, it becomes part of the overall structure and infrastructure of what we do. So we're excited about it at Cisco because it allows us to take advantage of the knowledge that we have as engineers, but actually put it in as true requirements, not just concepts.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. Sounds wonderful that you're really investing to, make people really understand again, what are we actually trying to achieve, really making it part of a business value and not something that you just like slap onto your products. So, Jason, what about you? What is your take on this? How do you embed privacy engineering in your processes? Yeah, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I want to echo what Lisa said in that I think you can't have enough privacy engineers in a company to be everywhere. You've got to get that privacy knowledge, out to the engineers. People shouldn't be building, just like security, right? You don't want somebody writing code and then coming along and adding security. You want people writing secure code. So you want people, with privacy too, you want people, developing interfaces with privacy in mind. And that requires awareness and understanding. They don't have to be privacy engineers. They don't have to have the subject matter expertise of a privacy engineer, but they have to have enough awareness to kind of get the basics right, and then be able to go to Lisa or Prasad or somebody else and say, hey, I think there might be a problem here. How do I fix it? And then the experts can come in and provide additional support. But if they don't know the right question to ask, they won't ask those questions.
Definitely a good point. Do you still have any tips on how to further embed this into your organization?
In terms of tips, so again, I think awareness training and getting people thinking about this, and it's not just that half an hour a year awareness training. You really got to get people understanding at a fundamental level what it means, especially what it means for your organization. I don't think there's any silver bullet. But certainly getting that out there, and at least it sounds like you were doing a great job at Cisco in doing that and embedding that kind of knowledge and awareness in the organization. So just doing everything you can to kind of bring that to the developer to understand that this is important. And I think also I want to echo what Lisa said. Executive buy-in is absolutely important. If you have a developer who is at Cisco or Apple and says, I'm doing something for privacy's sake, you probably don't have too many managers second guessing them. But I've been at organizations, I've seen organizations where somebody said, I want to build this way. And the manager said, no, that'll affect profitability. Let's do it a different way. And they get stuck in a rut there.
I think it's exactly what Prasad already said. Privacy, there's also a whole thing around culture. You also have to really, consider that. So I think that's the the main point. We have to build it into the culture so we can actually engineer it into our products and services. So Khaled, I would love to pick your brain. Could you share some examples of some privacy enhancing techniques? And I'm obviously curious to learn more about their strengths and weaknesses.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Victoria. So I was going to cover three different privacy enhancing technologies. let's call them the traditional risk-based data identification methods, synthetic data, and differential privacy. And I'll talk a little bit about each and try to give you a perspective on the strengths and weaknesses. So risk-based data identification methods are based on the premise that you can apply some transformations to data to reduce the privacy risks, and then you implement controls, security controls, privacy controls, contractual controls to manage the residual risk. So you essentially combine two mechanisms to create safer data. And by safer data, I essentially mean non-identifiable data. So you can use it for AI and machine learning purposes and secondary purposes. So you have data transformations and controls, and this has worked well for many years. And the kinds of data transformations that are typically applied are things like k-anonymity. There are more sophisticated methods, but k-anonymity is probably the better known of those specific transformations. So these types of risk-based anonymization methods have worked quite well over the years until they didn't. And the problem is that, or one of the problems or challenges we started to face, is that data complexity has increased. First of all, the volume of data has increased, but also the amount of information in data has increased. Data is being collected longitudinally, data is being linked and integrated across domains. So as data complexity increased, the amount of transformations you can do to the data and still have useful data is not very high. So organizations started relying more on controls. So you end up creating non-identifiable data with a few transformations and a lot of controls. The problem there, of course, is the economics become less attractive if you're investing a lot in controls. And if you start implementing a lot of controls, you're essentially treating this non-identifiable data the same as you would be treating personal information or person identifying information. So the over-reliance on controls, security controls, privacy controls as a mechanism to manage privacy risks for data that's supposed to be non-identifiable has started to create economic challenges as data complexity has increased. The other challenge we started to see is the negative discourse around anonymization. And you've all seen it in the media. I'm not saying this is fair or right, it's just the way it is. There's been a negative discourse in the media of re-identification attacks being publicized, and this has eroded trust of regulators and the public. And I have these conversations frequently with regulators, for example, around whether these risk-based anonymization methods are still effective or not, given the stories in the media and the narrative that has developed over time. So you're starting to see a trust problem. And the third challenge is skill set. To implement some of those methods requires quite a bit of skill and knowledge and expertise in statistical disclosure control. And that skill is hard to find. There are not many people who really know this very well. So you have three challenges that have become evident over time: the economic challenge, the trust challenge, and the ability to get skilled individuals to do this. So that's where we are with those. I mean, they're still being applied because they're well understood. There's a lot of history and so on, but you also have to appreciate the challenges. And over time, the challenges, I think, will become more and more relevant. The second approach is synthetic data, and that's starting to pick up steam. Synthetic data has been around for a few decades, but it's really become popular over the last few years with increasing sophistication of AI and machine learning and deep learning methods. And the basic idea there is you take a data set and you build a model to characterize the patterns and statistical properties in the data, and then you generate new data from the model. And you've seen synthetic data, I'm sure, in the context of deep fakes. So all these images of fake people, people who are not real, but the images look very real. So these are essentially synthetic data where you take images of many people and you train a model to understand what a person looks like, and then you can use that model to generate images of fake people. So you can do exactly the same thing with data. You get a real data set, you build a model, essentially a simulator of data, and then you can use that simulator to generate new data sets. And there's accumulating evidence that the privacy risks from these types of synthetic data are quite low, and that they are able to maintain the patterns in the original data set quite well. And so what data synthesis or synthetic data generation does is that it replaces the skill and expertise with compute. It's computationally intensive, but doesn't require as much expertise because the process is largely automated. You're just training models. So you can view that as a benefit or not, depending on your views on extensive compute. But I think the not needing significant skills, which is a problem that we've encountered in the past, is a big advantage. And then it solves the problems with trust as well, in the sense that the evidence on the effectiveness of synthetic data that's accumulating has been very encouraging. The third approach is differential privacy, and again, that's been used quite extensively. We've seen some large organizations adopt differential privacy, and the basic idea is, the traditional way that differential privacy has been applied is interactive mode, where you're running queries against the database, and then the results come back, and there's noise added to those results. The theory of differential privacy provides you with some strong guarantees for protecting against certain types of risks, and as long as the model has been implemented as it's supposed to be implemented, then the guarantees are quite strong. The challenge with differential privacy is the balance between data utility and data privacy is really hard to maintain or achieve because differential privacy is a very conservative model. It makes some very strong assumptions, very conservative assumptions. And therefore, if you implement the basic model faithfully, then achieving that balance is a challenge. So in practice, a lot of the requirements of differential privacy are relaxed, sometimes relaxed quite a bit, in order to achieve a good utility. So I think that'll be my caution there, is you really have to look at the implementation. Some folks have described it as differential privacy theater when it's applied, because you use the brand, but you relax a lot of the requirements to the point that, in order to get high utility, to the point that you're not really implementing differential privacy anymore because you've relaxed some of the assumptions too much. So that'll be my caution there. Is you have to be careful that it's, if you really want to say that the guarantees apply, you have to implement it faithfully. But if you implement it faithfully, then you have the risk of not achieving high utility or achieving useful data at the end. So that's the tricky part with differential privacy implementations. So these are the three basic pets, I think, that are being applied today. There are other ones like federated analysis or secure multi-party computation. I see that as more in the future. There's still some issues there that need to be worked on. Very promising technologies there, but I think they need some more, baking time before they're ready for being applied more broadly.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge based on your research and what you have seen. And things change all the time, and we also have to really move up. Whatever's changing in our world, that we also make sure that our solutions still fit. Whatever, if it's culture, technical, or whatever parameters there are involved, we also have to keep up and not just assume once we bake it in, it's there and it's sufficient. But I guess that applies to almost everything in life. So, Lisa, how do you engineer privacy into new technologies like AI or machine learning? I'm dying to learn this from you.
Well, we've taken that same concept that we did with privacy engineering, and we've actually really looked at what are the controls that we need to wrap around training data for, say, machine learning, or what do we need to put in for fairness, for bias? What kind of questions do we have, and how do we make sure that we have real clear explainability for something like AI/ML, so that when we can share that transparency out without giving away, the secret sauce kind of statement. So balancing that risk and helping people understand what we're trying to accomplish, also what we're not trying to accomplish, what you should not apply this to kind of statement becomes part of that story. And we've been working with our data scientists, with our engineers, to make sure that we find, again, that risk-based statement, that we don't, as we were just hearing, not shrink it down so that it's not usable, the data, but also make sure that we put the right level of control around the data, and that we really look at, do you really need this data to accomplish this? Be very aware of what you're selecting as your training data, what you're selecting, and just walking through that assessment at the beginning, again, by design, not waiting until you've tried some things and you found something cool, but really thinking about the privacy, the human rights, the things that we need to do that are people-oriented from the very beginning when you're looking at these technologies. That applies to our AI/ML, it applies to IoT, because all these things start rolling out into our smart cities and our smart campuses and and that's where people are. And we want to make sure that we are thinking about them and trying to avoid that baseline of harm. Right? Where's the harm in this? And then helping people also have that ability to come back and go, you made a decision for me, and I don't understand why I got a no, or I got a yes, or I got, or you provided this to me. So helping that transparency be part of it is one of the things we've been working closely with our engineers to balance that knowledge base. It's new for us, and we're working. One thing about it, it can't be one company, because we don't live in a silo anymore. So we're working with other companies, understanding how they're thinking through it, and trying to get to a point that we're using the same taxonomy, the same terminology, and the same ability to explain things so that people can feel comfortable going forward, that when they read something, they don't have to have one of our advanced degrees to understand what's going on.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for your input. And what about you, Kala? Do you still have any additions to that, or are you totally agree?
No, I agree. But I also wanted to just highlight a few other things around the implementation side, in terms of bringing some of these pets into practice. I mean, there are four things that come to mind. One is you have multiple, we discussed multiple technologies, and the first thing, of course, is the fit between the technology and the workflows in the organization. And that certain privacy enhancing technologies will fit better within an organization and organization's culture. And you have to take into account, I mean, some organizations, for example, are very conservative when it comes to privacy, so they'll emphasize privacy more than utility or more than cost. Some organizations, I've worked with, are very cost sensitive, so they will be looking for pets that are very cheap, basically, to implement and to operate over time. So there has to be a fit. I mean, all of these will solve the problem, is if they'll solve the problem in different ways, and they involve different compromises and trade-offs. So that, first of all, there has to be a fit. The second thing is, in practice, especially in organizations, large organizations with complex workflows, you will need more than one privacy enhancing technology. You will not necessarily be able to solve all your problems with one approach. So again, it comes to identifying the workflows and finding the appropriate fit, but assuming that we're going to implement X, whatever X may be, across the enterprise, is probably a very simplistic assumption. In practice, you need to identify a toolbox, or have a toolbox of technologies, and apply them appropriately, depending on the business, the workflows, and the priorities as well. And then the third thing I'll mention is you will always need some controls in place. So it's not just about technology, it's about training the individuals, putting in place processes, and being able to audit what people are doing. You're not going to control behaviors with completely controlled behaviors with technology. You still need to ensure that the engineers and the analysts working with data are cognizant and aware of the risks, and how to behave to minimize those risks, and to be able to audit as well what's going on. And then the last thing I'll say, just from the examples that I've seen, is it's not just about privacy protection. You also have to think about the utility of the data. So if you're preparing data for or creating non-identifiable data or data for machine learning and AI purposes and so on, some parts of the business may be very sensitive to data quality, in the sense that the analytics they run have to have a very high level of accuracy. Otherwise, the analysis is not useful anymore. And any type of transformation may be unacceptable. For example, you always have to keep in mind the utility requirements of the business, which may not be monolithic within an organization. Because if the privacy enhancing technology is not providing data that's useful, it's not going to survive for very long. So you have to accept that there are going to be some trade-offs and some compromises in order to ensure that the PETs that are implemented are supporting the business and helping the business continue to generate sufficient value. And which brings us back to the need to have a toolbox and multiple privacy enhancing technologies, so you can choose the one that can really achieve all of these different trade-offs. So anyway, these were my top 4 points or insights, let's say, about implementing PETs in practice.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think we all, totally agree. There's no one solution that fits all. You have to really look at the problem, really find out how are we going to solve this, use all the available tools out there, what you're actually already saying, and see how we can best really, solve an issue. Just like, it's kind of similar in software engineering, what Prasad already said. It's different principle, same approach to kind of, tackle a problem. So Jason, how do you evaluate that, the design efforts that you make, that they actually achieve the desired outcome? How do you approach this?
Sure. So echoing what I started with earlier in the session, there's 2 different levels. If you're looking at a systems engineering level and a high level, you want to look at residual risk. So did the full measure of controls you put in place sufficiently reduce the risk to be within organizational tolerance? Now, I'm going to unpack that a little bit because there's a lot to see there. One is you have to have a good risk model. And not many organizations do have a good formal risk model. There are several good ones out there: Fair for Privacy, Data Subject Aware Risk Assessment Model. There's CNIL's Privacy Risk Assessment. There's NIST Privacy Risk Assessment Model. So there's several good ones out there. Unfortunately, most organizations I see are using some homegrown ones, and they're mostly organizational focus, not focused on the risk to individuals, but the risk in terms of compliance and fines and those sorts of things. So having a good risk model is a good start. And the second, even more complicated part is tolerance. So if you look at the auto industry, right? The auto industry has dealt with for years, if we're building a car, people are going to die in our cars, right? It's an unavoidable risk. Now we can do things to reduce that risk. We can add safety features. We can, add other features that will reduce that. But we're not going to get it down to 0. People die in cars. The tech industry has not come to grips with that. And at least when I'm talking to private professionals, I ask them, well, what's your risk tolerance? And I start discussing it with them. Well, we don't want this to happen to anybody. But that's not realistic if you have a large enough at scale thing. So how many people are you okay with, as a result of some information getting out, being embarrassed and committing suicide? Again, your gut reaction is we don't want anybody to do that, but it will happen. And you've got to come to grips with, if you have millions and millions of users, those things will happen. So what is your coming up with a good risk tolerance? So again, that's kind of the high level systems engineering approach. When you get into the privacy engineering, the more specific controls, and you want to grade effectiveness, echoing what everybody else said here, implementation is not always design. You design something to encrypt data. The algorithm for encryption is perfect, but then when you implement it, you're using bad initial vector. There's timing attacks. There's all sorts of problems in implementation that you need to look at. So it's hard to say anything specifically, but for each control that you think is helping reduce risk, you want to define what it means to be good for that control, and then go out and review it. And it might not be, sometimes it'll be a technical review to reviewing code or reviewing input versus output, which is sometimes hard with differential privacy and some things like that when there's randomness added to it. Or even, again, looking at user interfaces and doing usability studies, and do people understand what they're agreeing to? So there's all sorts of different methods, and it's really, you have to look at each control you're implementing to define what you mean by effective within that.
Thank you so much for sharing some great tips, and especially looking into already existing risk models and not trying to fabricate your own when there's already something out there that might already assist you, especially when it comes to privacy. Indeed, it's something that affects not per se, or not only necessarily your own organization, but it actually affects all the other people, and we have to put them first. So thanks for sharing. We're already getting some audience questions coming in, but I want to have one more last question for Prasad before we switch on to that. So Prasad, how do you find the balance of cultivating innovation through privacy engineering? Do you have any advice?
Well, first and foremost, I'll wear my innovator's hat. We are the renegades. We always try to break things. We don't want to follow law. We don't want to be compliant with anything. That seems to be the popular definition of what innovation is. That said, I think there are elements that we said even in our panel discussion over the last few minutes. Privacy is everybody's problem. Likewise, innovation in an organization to be successful is everybody's challenge. There is the notion of balance between what is a utility versus the protection, or how much do you reveal versus how much do you protect. And I think Khalid was referring to the data utility versus data privacy conundrum that we always have to balance. In some sense, there are similarities between data privacy and what we want to achieve as a society in terms of being respectful to what absolutely needs to be protected. And then there is the need for creating the new experience, the new surprise, and elements like that. I'll take an example. With Fitbit, pretty much all of us probably today that listen to this are walking 10,000 steps or 5 miles, if you think about it, without realizing it, and so on. How many of us genuinely worry that Google will know what steps are being taken and what it'll do to my data? How much am I going to allow on one side versus at what point in time I stop it? That brings up, if I take this example, on one side, there is excitement over innovation and the changes that it brings with the likes of wearables and the benefits that it generates in terms of the data availability, what I can do with that data as an individual, as a family, as a group of friends who are taking on challenges and so on. On the other side, there is a fear of what it is or where will it go. And then there are engineering options like configurability, parameterization, containment in terms of selecting what you want or give away. We have done this in software engineering. We define software today that is configurable. We define software that works differently if you change its parameters that it takes. So you can adjust the levels that are coming in. So if I was to summarize this and look at it in terms of how do we do innovation and privacy engineering, there are two dimensions that come to me. One, leverage privacy engineering, make it everybody's sort of a sentiment in that sense, just like innovation is, and foster innovation. Do not cripple or stop innovation in the name of you can't do that. That's not allowed. You will break this law. Well, then you'll stifle innovation in the process. So you have to protect the reveal side of what it means really is what it is for innovation to be successful. But then you have to teach the engineers who are innovating or the innovators, which is all of us, you have to teach them how to make it with respect to thing called privacy is a requirement. And I think one of the questions, and with your permission, Victoria, I'll also take my take on that. One of the questions is how do you address or get software engineers to treat privacy as a requirement? In there lies a bunch of innovation that will come from the privacy as a domain in itself, whether it's the tools, whether it's the checklist, whether it's the guidances, policies, and their automation done in a manner where software engineers treat this as a first-class development technique that is available. And then after that, once you bring it down to that level, nobody really worries about it, will it happen or not. I mean, look at good old ER diagrams. How many of us look at data normalization and one-to-many relationships or many-to-many relationships being broken down? We do it in sleep. Yes, it takes time to learn, but once you do it, you ask anybody to design a database today and they'll go through this process and create it in that manner. If we can bring this down in that manner, avoid dark patterns in your user experiences or user interfaces. There are specific engineering capabilities that we can bring in. Some of it may start as coding guidelines, checklists, compliance checkers. They exist in software engineering. I remember in my early days of software engineering writing variable naming guidelines. It will sound very archaic when I talk about it today. But innovation of that kind, that variable naming guidelines, is where we started. Today, most developer studios don't even worry about it. You start typing and it suggests you what should be the variable name or what's the predicate that you want to use. That's innovation that has happened on the engineering side of software, which I think privacy is ready for. Privacy by design, the concept that Jason was alluding to, is ready for transforming itself into tools capabilities whereby once you do this, to the question that was there for our panel, my take is once you do this, and that is required, software engineers will adopt it because it makes life easy for software developers. And if you make life easy for anybody, that's the engineering principle. People will use that artifact. That is what beauty of engineering is that it makes life easy, it makes life workable, and then you go on and use it in that manner. That is where innovation focus needs to go. And we are seeing that. We are seeing startups that are coming in. We are seeing startups that even bring in what is possibly far off technology like quantum computing being brought in the context of privacy elements. We have worked with them. So there is plenty that is happening in terms of innovating to make sure privacy engineering is first class, and innovating assuming privacy becomes a requirement, and therefore newer and newer things come up. That's how I would look at balancing these two.
Thank you so much for sharing your take on that and already answering one of the audience questions. Well, we have another question, like, what's the best tools available to de-identify a large volume unstructured data? Khaled, I think you might be the best person to answer this. What's your
sure? For unstructured data.
Yes.
So I mean, there are a number of open source and commercial tools out there. There's been a very active effort over the last decade or so to develop, benchmark, and evaluate different technologies for text de-identification. I'm not going to recommend any specific products or tools, but there's a very large number of solutions out there, and I mean, in the research literature, there still remains quite a bit of innovation as well in this space. Even in the last week, there were 2 papers published on really interesting work on kind of using deep learning methods for the identification of structured data. There were some presentations here actually at the conference yesterday. For example, we had a presentation on that talked about the de-identification of unstructured data. So yeah, kind of a bit of a general answer. There are a bunch of open source tools, but I think the commercial tools that take the open source technology and wrap some more enterprise level capabilities around it are probably what we'd be looking at, just because they're they have more polish around them.
Thanks for sharing your take on that, Khaled. We have one question. I think Lisa already has an answer to that. Can you do privacy without security, or vice versa?
Yeah, and I did answer that a little bit earlier. What we have found out in trying to, like I said, built our privacy on top of our security, is that we have some products that don't process people's data. It doesn't make a decision for people. It doesn't, and it's doing some sort of, one of them is just like over in the switching of our just data through it. We don't really know what the packet is, so I can't really do anything there, but I can encrypt it. So I can do the security piece of it without knowing anything else about the data going through it. So we always have that foundation, but more and more, there's always something about a person in what's being done. So even if it's just your admin tool or if it's just the work that's going on. So we do see them as hand in hand. They are totally separate in some ways because confidentiality, integrity, availability, you know, on our side, it's more of the fairness and that trust pieces of what's going on in privacy. But they do have to work together. We can't have privacy without security. Thought of as design. We do not want to wait and try to bolt it on after the fact, because by that time it makes it so much harder as an engineer to get it and plugged into what we're doing.
Jason, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little bit of a counter approach. This is kind of one of my pet peeves of privacy and security. I think they are separate animals, and in fact, so I use Dan Soloff's taxonomy of privacy, and if you look, security is really only 1/16 of that. And you know, you can do all sorts of things with regard to people's privacy, like manipulative designs that interfere with people's autonomies, intruding into people's personal space that have nothing to do with security. My view is the security privacy discussion is generally focused on data privacy or information privacy, which is certainly a huge part of what we do, but it's not the only thing. And I think thinking about that in terms of security kind of belies the other privacy issues that we should also be concerned about.
Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree with Jason. It is the use of that data that privacy gives us the difference of what is versus securing it. But you have to have that 1/16, but the other parts are so much more interesting, which is why I love privacy.
Totally agree with you guys also. You know, when I take a look at it myself, I basically kind of draw a Venn diagram. You have privacy, you have security, and there is some overlap, but they also are separate concepts that do not really relate to each other. So we have, I think, one last question that we can still handle in the time. So does the panel see organizations investing in training their data scientists or data engineers on privacy engineering and privacy by design principles? Does anyone has anything to say about this?
We've been able to build that in for our data scientists. We have actually an organization internally that takes, and they've built in our work on privacy and security as part of their baseline to help the engineering teams think through it. But it is that balancing, because as we just went through with some of the pets, you don't want to lose the integrity and the accuracy of your data when you're trying to protect it or for privacy or security. So we're constantly looking at the risk in this environment, but at least if you can't do it in the data, wrapping your processes around it, making sure that only the right people are using the data for the right reasons. You know, asking those questions about data sharing and data, the processes that help us know what, where, and how. Are we using data that we purchased, its accuracy, but do we have the commercial use of it? Do we have, you know, there's so many things that we can ask, and those are what we're teaching our data scientists to be more responsible. Again, it's not a yes, no, it's always a yes, and here's the things we would like you to think about when you're doing it. We don't want you to stop what you're doing, but we want you to think through that responsibility as you go forward as a data scientist, as an engineer, you know, and then even with our sales and marketing teams and everyone else as they're telling these stories about new innovation, to be able to explain that responsibility is built in.
Yeah, totally agree with that. You know, it's what we already said in the beginning of this panel. It's kind of another requirement. We have to all understand what the requirement is to really understand and to really find a solution. So, as far, you know, talking about training, you know, I think it's kind of essential that we invest in really making the point of what we're trying to accomplish, so that everyone within the organization, if you're an engineer or not, understands what we're trying to add, and people will know themselves how to really solve it. Sure, there are like very interesting techniques out there which, you know, already Khaled talked about, which, you know, are not that very easy per se to implement, but if you understand the real problem that you're trying to fix, it already is such a huge step in finding the correct solution. Do we have any last tips? Any last tips, tricks, takeaways, Prasad? Any last things you want to share with the audience?
I think the part that I would definitely emphasize on is the role of data privacy and privacy engineering and making it more first class in our lives. I think a lot of questions, discussions that we have had as panelists, as well as what we saw, that more first class it becomes as the software engineering principles, data engineering principles, more will be the innovation and the freedom trust to use AI-led innovations as such. And it's an imperative that we bring it to that level of maturity.
Mm. Thank you so much. Collins, what are your last takeaways?
So I think that there's huge demand for data for secondary analysis for AI and machine learning, the last few years I've been working on the development and application of synthetic data generation techniques, I think that the level of innovation in this space is very fast and very rapid, a lot of the challenges that people perceive exist around getting access to large volumes of safe to use data. I think been a lot of innovation. A lot of these problems have been solved. So I think the practical issue today is the adoption of solutions that we know work reasonably well versus the lack of solutions.
Thank you so much. Jason, any last words for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a question about training, and I think that echoes what we were talking about bringing awareness into the organization. And certainly a lot of my work has shifted from consulting on privacy by design and privacy engineering to doing more and more training. And I'm getting more organizations asking me to either use my CAN training or do training for them or develop training for their staff. So I think this is absolutely critical if we're going to get to a point where privacy is second nature to people who are doing design and development.
Very well. Lisa, any last words for today? Then we're going to wrap this up.
I would just say, listening to all of the other panelists, this is just, I've learned, as well as I feel like I've been revalidated, and I believe that this is the direction all of us should be going as engineers, and helping our environments become risk-based, but that privacy is the baseline from the beginning, that by design, but really embedded into us as people.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Well, I want to thank the audience for tuning in, listening to our amazing speakers that we had on today, and have fun with your next session.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our esteemed panel of speakers. It's wonderful insights. I'm definitely sure, as Lisa said at the end, I'm sure definitely for everyone, I mean, it's just not limited to DIM professionals. I think this is a good phase, a good session where people would have learned, they would have been able to revalidate some of the theories, and I think it's definitely going to be on a good foot. Once again, on behalf of Infosys Data Privacy Office and IAPP, I would like to thank all our esteemed panel speakers for this wonderful session. Thank you. Now, to our next topic, solving the zero-sum paradigm, anonymization. So in the last decade, the ability to collect and store personal data has exploded many folds. With 2/3 of the world population having access to internet, electronic medical records becoming the norm, and the rise of Internet of Things, this is unlikely to stop anytime soon. Collected at scale from financial or medical services, when filling in online surveys or liking pages, this data has an incredible potential for good. It drives scientific advancements in medicines, social science, and promises to revolutionize the way business and governments function, which is the artificial intelligence. While rich medical, behavioral, and social demographic data are key to modern data-driven research, their collection and use raise a legitimate privacy concern. Anonymizing such datasets through de-identification theories and sampling the process of anonymizing datasets before sharing them has been the main paradigm used in research and elsewhere to share data while preserving people's privacy. So data protection laws worldwide consider anonymous data as not personal data anymore, allowing it to be freely used, shared, and sold. This brings the risk of balancing the merits of utility as well as the level of privacy that needs to be where there's a trade-off. So I would like to invite our next speaker, Paul Francis, to for this session to give a little bit about a short intro. Paul. Paul is a tenured faculty at Max Planck Institute for Software Systems in Germany. Paul has held research positions at Cornell University, Esri, NTT Software Labs, Belcore, and Mitre, and was the chief scientist at 2 Silicon Valley startups. In the past, Paul's research centered around routing and addressing problems in the internet and P2P networks. Paul's innovations include NAT shared tree multicast, the first P2P multiclass system, the first DHT as part of a landmark routing and virtual aggregation. More recently, Paul's research has focused on internet privacy, focus on private behavioral advertising systems and anonymized politics. Paul is also a co-founder of the startup AirClock, which offers solution via a unique approach that provides instant anonymized analytics in a compliant and approved way. So I would like to pass this baton to Paul. Paul, please kindly take over.
Hi, this is Paul Francis. Sorry if there was some delay there. We're in the process of setting things up. I thank you very much for the introduction. I guess as a result, I don't have to say too much about myself, other than besides working closely with AirCloak, which builds a data anonymization solution, and being a researcher at Max Planck Institute for Software Systems. I'm also a founding participant in the OpenDiffix project, which is a project to bring sort of democratize data anonymization, bring actually some of the technology that we worked on at AirCloak into an open source setting. I want to start actually by saying that my mission, and really that of my team, is to expand knowledge through data. And this might seem a little bit strange because normally when you hear a data anonymization or data privacy talk, it's about protecting data. But we see ourselves as trying to expand knowledge, really by making data safe, but useful and easy to share. And as was said in the introduction, there's a lot of data that simply doesn't get used because it's not easy to share. People are afraid to share it. They don't know how to share it. And we're missing out on a lot a lot of knowledge potential. So the title of the talk, Solving the Zero-Sum Paradigm, Anonymization. So actually this talk was, this title was suggested to me. It wasn't a title I suggested, but I kind of liked it. But of course it raises the question, what is the zero-sum paradigm in anonymization? And that's really this notion that you can choose privacy, or you can choose utility. And by utility, I mean the ability to get good analytics out of data that you're de-identifying or anonymizing. You can have one or the other, but you can't really have both. And I'm sort of here to tell you that that's kind of the case. Indeed, there's a strong relationship between privacy and utility with respect to data anonymization. And the more you lean towards one, in general, the less you get out of the other. This doesn't mean that it's impossible to have useful data that's also anonymous, but it's not going to be nearly as useful as the data would be if it were not anonymized or just weakly anonymized. So really, the title maybe, rather than solving the zero-sum paradigm, anonymization, should be navigating the zero-sum paradigm, and that's what we'll be doing in this talk. So in this talk, I want to cover some sort of basic concepts of anonymity at different levels of privacy and utility. We'll talk a little bit about how to ensure that they're safe once you've selected sort of a privacy level for your data, and a little bit on how to maximize the utility when you're at sort of the strongest privacy levels. So in really the rest of the talk, I'm going to kind of be working on this vertical scale of not very private at the bottom. Sorry. Hang on, I'm just going to turn on my my pen. So, at the bottom of the scale, not at all private, and at the top of this vertical scale, very private. And so really everything we're going to do is kind of going to be oriented to this vertical scale. So with that in mind, let's get started. So at the bottom of the scale, of course, is raw data, which is 100% useful in terms of utility and not at all private. Kind of next up on the scale of privacy is a technique called pseudonymization. And pseudonymization, it's really the act or the method of replacing personally identifiable information with a random string. And personally identifying information in this case is both information that is unique to an individual or singles that individual out among all others, and is information that tends to be public knowledge. So you take this information, you get rid of it, replace it with a random string, but all the rest of the data remains as it is in your database. So for example, things like a name, an address, email address, a social security number, and so on, these are all personally identifiable information that when you pseudonymize, you simply replace with some random value. Hopefully a random value that's not easy to reverse engineer. So for example, and I'll be using this table for multiple examples as we go, so let's have a look at it. Here's a table that is basically geolocation data. So you have latitude and longitude and time. So this might be record traces from phone company data or something like that. And then you have some demographic data like zip code, where they live, their birth date, and so on. And then identifying data like the name, and in this case, the social security number. And pseudonymization would simply be taking this personally identifiable information, the name and social security number, and turning it into just a random value of some sort, so that personally identifiable information is gone. But everything else in the data set, when you pseudonymize in the simple form, is left as is. And as a result, the data, while being certainly more private than it was, has almost its full utility, because chances are you're not going to be doing general analytics over names or over social security numbers. So the information you're losing is not hurting analytics too much, and yet the data is much more private than it was. And pseudonymization is recognized by the GDPR. The GDPR is the data protection regulations in Europe, and it's stated as something that you should do if you can by GDPR. In other words, if you can pseudonymize your data and still use that data for whatever application you're using it for, then you must do so. Okay. Now, slightly stronger than pseudonymization, sort of in the scale of not private to very private, would be pseudonymization plus what I'm calling here quasi-identifier generalization. And the question is, what is a quasi-identifier? These are information fields that individually don't necessarily single out a user, but taken together do single out users and tend to be public knowledge. So let me give an example. It so happens that one's zip code, at least in the USA, their birth date and their gender singles out most of the population. And by this, I mean, chances are this information about you is unique among all people. Only you have a given zip code, a given birth date, and a given gender. That's true for about 75% of the population. And so this would be a quasi-identifier. It tends to be public information or information that there's multiple ways of learning about a person. And it identifies that person when taken together. So it's considered a quasi-identifier. And then generalization is simply the process of making these quasi-identifiers less specific until they no longer single out. So in this example, for instance, we might take a 5-digit zip code and reduce it to, say, just the first 3 digits. And so now it's encompassing a larger area, but of course, many more people as well. We might take a birthday and just turn it into a birth year. As an example, and doing this would cause this to no longer be quasi-identifiers because these values taken together would now refer to multiple people and not to a single individual. And whether this degrades the quality of the data from an analytic point of view really depends on what you want to do as an analyst. It may or it may not. But in any event, sort of the core data of the table, which in this case is location data, still remains unchanged. Next up on the privacy scale is what we've just shown, plus a little more generalization. And why would you do this? This is because sometimes, even if you share your data with only a few analysts, if those analysts happen to know certain information about people in the data, they may still be able to re-identify those individuals. An example might be a hospital database where the quasi-identifiers have been generalized away, the personally identifiable information is gone, but the hospital visit dates remain in the database. And if I, as an analyst, happen to know the visit dates of somebody I'm very familiar with, for instance, my wife or a friend, then I'm likely to be able to find them in this database and re-identify them. So where possible, this kind of data can be generalized a little bit as well. So to go to our example, for instance, in this location database, we might wish to to change latitude and longitude from 4 digits of precision, which would be about 10 meters squared, to only 3 digits of precision, which would be about 100 meters squared. Or we could take time, instead of a granularity of 1 second, we could bucketize it into 30 seconds or something like that. And I mentioned this, additional generalization because an example of a standard that requires this would be HIPAA, which is the privacy standard for medical data and sharing medical data in the USA. And HIPAA says if you're going to share data wherever possible, you should pseudonymize, you should generalize quasi-identifiers, and you should do a little more generalization on things like hospital visit dates or the dates of prescriptions and things like that. Again, so long as it doesn't too much ruin the quality of the data for the analytic purpose. So that's sort of a second privacy standard with respect to this scale of not very private to very private. Now, everything I've talked to up till now, sort of this HIPAA level of privacy and weaker, individuals can be singled out, right? You can look at a row in the database and you can say, yes, this row is about one person. You may not know who that person is, but you can tell that it's one person. And that's what I mean when I say singled out. And actually, this is a technical term that's used in GDPR when evaluating anonymity. And as long as individuals can be singled out, there's always the possibility that somebody with access to the data who has enough knowledge about individuals in the data can re-identify that individual and figure out who it is. So really the kind of the next level of privacy above what I've talked about so far would be what I'm calling here full generalization. And this is where singling out is not really even possible. So I show that sort of next up here on this scale. And just to give an example of sort of the kind of generalization you get into when you're really fully generalizing a database is, you know, a birthday might be turned into 20-year bins of age, or time might be generalized, you know, all the way to the month, for example. So it can take a lot of generalization to get to the point where the data is no longer about individuals, as shown in this snippet of the table above, to the table below, where now the data is about groups of people. So this column of personal identifier or a person identifier is now a number of people that are in the data. So you would say, well, there's around 1,200 and some people, you know, that visited Denver in the month of January in this age group and with this gender. And so this is very strongly anonymized data at this point. And this is one of the things that one tends to have to do to make data fully general. A second, so this is generalization, and this is what I've talked about before. A second common technique is suppression. So for instance, if you look at this this second row in the data, there's only 4 people in this particular database that have visited Ithaca, New York, in the month of January in this age group. And you might say, well, 4 is a small number. That's a number of people that's getting awfully close to singling out an individual. That makes me a little uncomfortable with respect to this database. So that could be suppressed altogether, just simply removed from the database. And suppression is a fairly common technique when dealing with data anonymization. And a third common technique is making the data a little bit noisy. So in this case, maybe the exact number of people in the database that fall within this bucket is 1,243, but you might add a little bit of noise to that just to add a little uncertainty to the data to make it, you know, to make, you know, certain remote but possible attacks even less likely. So in a way, these are the things: generalization, suppression, and adding noise are the main kind of technical tools that come to play when strongly anonymizing data. And you might notice, all right, so sort of the next point when talking about standards, again, brings us back to GDPR. GDPR has the word anonymization as a legal term. So GDPR says if data is legally anonymous, then actually it's no longer personal data at all. And you know, all of the other regulations of GDPR no longer apply. You can share that data freely. It's really outside of the scope of GDPR. So if you can get your data to the point of full generalization, where really singling out is not possible, then at least by GDPR standards, it's not even personal data anymore, and you can share it freely. So you might notice on this slide, I've left a little bit of room at the top. And that's because you know, you can always do more, right? You could have bigger aggregates, you could have more noise, more suppression. There are other techniques like outlier removal and so on that you can add into the thing, and make data even more private if you wish. And why would you do that if you're, for instance, already GDPR compliant? Well, one reason is because, you know, there's no strong definition for what constitutes anonymization in GDPR. So some people might feel that the bar is a little higher than others for getting data to that point. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some other things now. So we've now covered kind of 4 general levels of anonymization on this scale of less private to more private. Most of them still allow singling out. Full generalization does not. And so I'm gonna start showing it this way as I'm showing on this slide. At the beginning of the talk, we talked about this trade-off between utility or data quality and privacy. And indeed, as you can see from the examples I've given, as you make data more anonymous, necessarily you end up making it less precise, less accurate, more general, and what have you. And so there is a strong relationship between data quality and privacy. So really, you can take this privacy scale and call it a privacy accuracy scale or a privacy utility scale, where at the bottom it's less private but more accurate, and at the top it's more private but less accurate. So this is kind of locked in, but also, as I've shown, there's a fair amount of flexibility into how to generalize the data once you've decided to do so. I mean, you could make certain columns higher resolution, other columns lower resolution. You can trade those off as needed, depending on the analytic task that you have, depending on the use case for the data. All right. So, I talked about these various levels or various strengths of anonymization, various levels of privacy, and it naturally begs the question, well, is then the less private data less safe in some sense? Is it more likely to be re-identified? And one way of answering that question would just be to go back into history and to look at the number of reported malicious re-identifications for data at various levels of anonymization. And by reported malicious re-identification, I mean re-identifications that were done with malicious intent. The intent to make money off of somebody or to embarrass somebody. And of course, it has to be reported or I don't know about it. So I'd like to look at the numbers. I mean, I've spent a lot of effort myself personally looking for these incidents. And I'll just fill in a couple of the blanks here. If you look at raw data, which by definition is re-identified because it hasn't been anonymized at all, as I'm sure you know, there are literally thousands of breaches for raw data yearly. On the other end of the scale, though, is full generalization, and I'm not able to find any instance where fully generalized data, and this would be data that's released, for instance, by census organizations and so on. I'm unable to find any incident of malicious re-identification, and I've talked with a number of people from various national census bureaus, and they don't know either. And so the question is, these levels in between, what are the number of reported incidents? And I'll just give you a second, to just think about what the numbers might be, ranging from 1,000 yearly to none. Okay, good enough, I guess. The answer is none. None, none, and none. In other words, I cannot find, after significant effort, cases of even pseudonymized, just simply pseudonymized data, where there have been malicious re-identifications on that data. And I find this very interesting. It means that really any level of anonymization can be quite safe, at least based on history, on recorded history. And of course, it might be true that there have been incidents that have not been reported. But in my mind, if there are no reported incidents, then it's pretty safe. It's in a way hard to do much better than that. And why is this? And this is a very important point that I want to make, is that really how safe the data is partly dependent on how strongly you anonymize it, but very dependent on how you share it. So for instance, census data, which by definition has to be shared with the public, really must be very strongly anonymized, full generalization, and so on. But medical data, for instance, is widely shared. but not open to the public, or usually not. It's shared on a sort of limited contractual basis. If you're a medical researcher and you want to get a hold of some data, you can, and the data tends to be just pseudonymized and maybe a little bit stronger. But you get that data under contractual agreement, not to protect it, not to share it, and so on. And because of this, this really exposure level, as long as the exposure level that you have pertains well with the amount of privacy, then in fact you can be safe. History shows us that it is safe. Now, unlike utility, exposure is not coupled together with the privacy scale. So, for instance, you can have weekly or just pseudonymized data with very high exposure, and from time to time this does happen. And although I'm still actually not aware of malicious re-identifications, there have been many re-identifications of this data that tend more to embarrass the organization that released the data than really cause trouble to the individuals in the data. But nevertheless, it's not safe. If you have weekly anonymized data with high exposure, that's not safe. On the other hand, you could have very strongly anonymized data and very low exposure, and that's of course very safe, but it also really leads to unnecessarily poor data quality. In a sense, there's no reason to do this as long as you're controlling the exposure very well. So ultimately what you want is the right amount of exposure for the level of privacy that you need in order to get the utility out of the data that you need to get. And as long as you do this well, then again, history tells us that that the data is safe. So I've showed you some methods, especially generalization, suppression, and noise. And really, this is not rocket science. These things are not that hard to do, especially when you're at the level of just singling out individuals. These lower levels of anonymization, technically, it's fairly straightforward. You just need to take care of your exposure. When you get into full generalization, so long as you can deal with relatively general data, it may also be quite straightforward. But when you start getting into areas where you're really trying to get the most out of your data, the most utility you can, while keeping it strongly anonymized, it can get tricky. Different anonymization mechanisms, the ones we've mentioned, plus others, affect utility differently. And bad choices may reduce data quality unnecessarily. They may also advertently weaken privacy, but in general, what I see in practice is that people tend to anonymize their data much more than is really necessary for a given use case or for a given release. So with respect to that, and I'll finish up here in just a couple slides, is I'd like to talk about the Open Diffix project. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, this is a project to open source Diffix, which is the underlying technology for the AirCloak, to open source this and to create tools that allow non-experts to easily maximize data quality while keeping strong anonymization. So you don't have to so carefully go through all these different possible mechanisms and understand the various ways in which they anonymize and in the various ways in which they reduce the quality of data. Rather, we want to create tools that just allows the user to specify the data granularity as an SQL query, and Diffix automatically applies the right amount of noise, the right amount of suppression, outlier removal, and other things to give you strong anonymization while letting you worry as a user, letting you worry about the quality of the data and not how to anonymize the data. So just as a very quick, simple example, OpenDiffix, which has two modes, one is a trusted analyst mode and one is an untrusted analyst mode. But in a trusted analyst mode, the analyst may just simply put a query to the database as well as through OpenDiffix and get back the answers both in the raw form and the anonymized form. The analyst can compare these answers, and if the data quality is unacceptable for some reason, the analyst can kind of change the query a little bit. So, for instance, increase the size of the area in the location database, or increase or decrease the time slots. Get back the answers, compare again, and just work with the data from the point of view of quality and not from the point of view of anonymity. And as soon as the analyst has something that they feel is acceptable quality, they can release this to the public. And a second mode for OpenDiffix will be an untrusted analyst mode, where an untrusted analyst can make any number of queries they wish to the database through OpenDiffix, get back anonymized answers, and be unable to re-identify individuals in the data. And this involves a little bit more protection mechanisms or a little bit more noise in order to deal with untrusted analysts. OpenDiffix will be based on a Postgres extension. So basically will be an installation of Postgres and some extensions. The underlying technology is Diffix, is developed by Aircloak and my research institute. The open source product will have some usability and utility improvements over the Aircloak product, based really on lessons learned technically over the last 4 or 5 years, and will be a kind of open code license. So we're looking for a first release in 2 or 3 months from now. And that's really it. Thank you very much for sticking with me. And I would like to invite anybody who's interested in the OpenDiffix process to come to our website. You can register for announcements, talk to us, find out how you can participate, and so on. And that's the end. If there's any time left at all, I'm happy to take questions at this point. Okay. Hello again, I guess. So I see there's some questions on the chat window, and I've been instructed just to take them as I wish. So I guess I'll read them and then think about them and then maybe answer them. The first is how generalization takes care of legal basis of processing or obligation of processing entities to inform data subjects about data processing. Actually, this is a tricky thing for us. So there's at least in the context of Aircloak, where we're trying to do strong anonymization, but the nature of the technology is that the raw data has to still stay somewhere. So we have a situation where the raw data is in the database. Our system, our Aircloak system, is in front of the data, and then an analyst can query the data through our system. And this is processing of the data. So it's processing of non-anonymized data for the purpose of anonymizing data. And we've seen, for instance, the data protection authorities or officers say that this is still processing of personal data, and therefore it's not anonymous, and data subjects has to be informed in terms of privacy statements and so on. And we've had others say, well, as long as the only purpose of processing is anonymizing the data, then it's okay. But nevertheless, once the data is anonymized, then it's okay. But the processing itself, yeah, it may be the case that you still have to inform the data subjects that you're going to be doing that processing. To me, it seems a little silly, but but that, so far as I understand it, is the law. A question before that, and the organizers just tell me when time is up, and I'll stop. Many companies such as Google Ads groups, Google Ads groups you into a category similar to a little bit of generalization, but does that make these companies compliant other laws? So I don't know. I mean, of course, Google and many companies, especially those involved with advertisements, are internally not really anonymizing your data, especially in terms of strong anonymization. And the fact that they may generalize it and then release this data as categories, as long as they're still talking about individuals. I mean, as long as they say, you know, Paul Francis is in category, you know, old people who are interested in technology, as long as they're still identifying me or singling me out in the data, it's not anonymous, even if I've been categorized in some advertising bucket. I don't know if that's answering the question, but there it is. How are we on time? Can I take one more, or should I stop? Nobody said stop. I'll take one more. Another question: how do we ensure data privacy in research? For example, using data lake by multiple researchers. So, you know, I think this gets back to my talk a little bit. In research, so I would say this: rule number one in releasing data for research is never release it to the public at large. You know, don't do what Netflix did, for instance, which is just, you know, release the data to the public, even it's only pseudonymized, and then expect researchers to do the right thing. I think it's okay to weakly anonymize data, to just pseudonymize it or a little bit more, and share it with researchers, as long as you do so under, as I said before, under, you know, very limited exposure, under contractual agreement, even threatening penalties if the researchers don't comply, and so on. And I think as long as you do that, you're operating in a safe zone. Of course, privacy violations are conceivable at that point, but I think at that point you're quite safe to do it. Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much. I hope that was useful and interesting, and please do contact me if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. It is a very quite interesting session. And on the project front, I think that definitely there would be a lot of participants, one already in the queue for showcasing the interest. Thanks for your valuable insights. Now, the next topic, achieving innovation. Achieving innovation through embracing privacy by design. So privacy by design can foster innovation, and it should. There are several ways to think about it. One is about from the user perspective, and one from a mere backend perspective. The words of our own next speaker, you know, the argument that privacy stifles big data innovation reflects a dated zero-sum mindset. It is a false dichotomy consisting of unnecessary trade-off between the benefits of big data and the protection of personal information within the big data sets. In fact, the opposite is true. The privacy drives innovation, and it forces innovators to think creatively to find solutions that serve multiple functionalities. We need to abandon the zero-sum thinking and adopt a positive-sum paradigm where both big data innovation and privacy may be achieved. So our next speaker, who needs no introduction, still it will be my greatest privilege to provide a small bio of this superwoman and amazing visionary. Dr. Ann Kovakian is recognized as one of the world's leading privacy experts. Dr. Ann serves as an unprecedented 3 terms as the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada. As she created the concept Privacy by Design, a framework that seeks to proactively embed privacy into the design specification of information technologies, network infrastructure, and business practices. thereby achieving the strongest protection possible. In 2010, the international privacy regulators, as part of the WTO conference, held unanimously passed a resolution recognizing privacy by design as an international standard. Since then, privacy by design has been translated in 40 different languages, and as an output, in 2018, privacy by design was included in a sweeping new law in the EU, the General Data Protection Regulation. Dr. Kawakin is now the Executive Director of the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center, and she's also a Senior Fellow of the Ted Lodge's Leadership Center at Ryerson University and a Faculty Fellow at the Center for Law, Science and Innovation at Sandra O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. Dr. Kawakin is author of 2 books, The Privacy Payoff, How Successful Business Build Customer Trust, and with Tyler Hamilton, and Who Knows Safeguarding Your Privacy in a Networked World with Dawn Tapscott. She has received numerous awards recognizing her leadership in privacy, including being named as one of the top 25 women of influence in Canada, named as one of the top 10 women in data security and privacy, and named as one of the Power 50 by the Canadian Business. She was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal by the Governor General of Canada for her outstanding work on creating privacy by design and taking it global, and named as one of the 50 most impactful smart city leaders. Also, with several other credits like named among top women in tech in December 2017 and awarded the Toastmasters Communication and Leadership Award, recognized among the top 100 identity influencers, and most recently she was named among the top 18 global artificial intelligence influencers within the AI and tech space. And recently she was awarded the 2020 Canadian Women in Cybersecurity Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition of contributions to cybersecurity and privacy in Ontario. With great privilege, I would like to call upon Dr. Ann to talk on the particular topic.
Many thanks, Rajesh. Very kind of you. Lovely introduction. Okay, and now we're going to go and I'm going to talk to you about privacy by design. I'll just tell you a little bit about it and then we'll talk about current day things. Rajesh is kindly going to advance my slides. So next slide, please, Rajesh. I always like to start by dispelling the myths because there are so many myths out there about what privacy is and what it should be doing. In the next slide, for example, you'll see that a lot of people used to say, oh, privacy is all about secrecy. If you don't have anything to hide, what's the problem? You can just release all your information. That's nonsense. Privacy is not about secrecy. It's not about having something to hide. I always used to say that could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich. It's ridiculous. Next slide, please. Privacy is all about control. It's about personal control. In the next slide, please. which is so critical. You as the user, the data subject, have to be in control. This is critical because you see, only you know the context associated with the data. Only you know if the data are sensitive or not, if you wish to release it or not. Freedom of choice is absolutely critical. I always say to people, look, you want to give away your privacy, be my guest, as long as you make the decision to do so. You have to be the one to do so. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination, that it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And I couldn't agree more. That captures the saying so well, that it has to be the individual who makes these decisions. In the next slide, on a broader scale, I always like to tell people that privacy is the foundation of our freedom. You cannot have free and open societies without a solid foundation of privacy. It's a necessary condition for societal prosperity, for well-being, and it breeds innovation and creativity. And I always like to give the example of Steve Jobs, the brilliant creator of Apple. He used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, less a day. Then he would take it to the dealership and return it and buy another one. And he did this during the course of his lifetime. Why, you might say? Well, at that time in California, you had up to 6 months after you bought a new vehicle to get a license plate number on it. He didn't want to get a license plate number. He didn't want to be tracked or surveilled. So 6 months less a day, he would take it back to the dealership and then get a new car. And this went on for a long time. I love that story. Unfortunately, after he died, California changed the law, and you have to get a license plate almost right away after you buy a new car. Privacy is the essence of freedom. Surveillance is the exact opposite. It is the antithesis of privacy. It's the exact opposite. One of the negative consequences of surveillance is it usurps your cognitive bandwidth. Sorry, I use that kind of language. I'm a psychologist. It makes you go inward. It shrinks you. You're always looking over your shoulder, wondering if anyone is watching or whatever, as opposed to thinking freely. Wild blue sky thinking is what breeds innovation and creativity. Surveillance does the opposite. We have to get rid of surveillance. In the next slide, please, I talk about privacy by design, which I created in the first of my 3 terms as privacy commissioner in the first few weeks. Because you see, here's the difference. When I became commissioner, I had a wonderful staff of amazing lawyers, but lawyers take, understandably, a legal approach to regulatory compliance. You know, there's a data breach, you bring in the law after the breach, and you offer a remedy. Very important. I wanted something proactive before the harms arose. I wanted to prevent the harms from arising, a model of prevention, much like a medical model of prevention. So over 3 nights at my kitchen table at night, I created Privacy by Design, which is all about starting up front, try to prevent the harms from arising, and having that be work in conjunction with regulatory compliance, which is always after the fact. In the next slide, please. As Rajesh mentioned, Privacy by Design was unanimously passed as an international standard in 2010. Privacy commissioners have a privacy data protection conference once a year. It's usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day conference, we have a half-day session devoted to introducing resolutions that all the commissioners vote on. And that year, I introduced a resolution that Privacy by Design should complement regulatory compliance, which is privacy laws, which always kick in after the fact. And to my amazement, it was unanimously passed. And I was amazed because, as I said, most commissioners are brilliant lawyers. You know, they love drilling down to Section 29, Sub 2, Part A, and applying that to the fact situation. Brilliant. But I wanted something up front. And afterwards, when I went around thanking my fellow commissioners and just asking them why they supported this so strongly, the answer was simple. And the next slide, please. They said, look, with privacy laws, we're just getting the tip of the iceberg in terms of the privacy harms. Most of the privacy and data breaches are remaining undetected, largely unknown, unchallenged, unregulated. And that, to privacy commissioners, was completely unacceptable. So they said regulatory compliance after the fact is no longer sustainable as the sole model for ensuring the future of privacy. What we need to do is introduce something up front in an effort to prevent the harms from arising. And I was delighted with this. And while I was commissioner, not a week would go by when I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction around the world. In the next slide, please. As was mentioned, Privacy by Design has been translated into 40 languages. It's so exciting that the uptake was so strong. And I was just delighted because we really need a lot of help in terms of privacy and data protection. Now, 2 essentials to Privacy by Design. In the next slide, please. First, I've already talked about, you want to prevent the privacy harms from arising. You have to be proactive, upfront, embed privacy into the code, into the design of your operations, seamlessly, have it present so that you can't forget about it or you can't expect individuals to look for the opt-out box that says, give me privacy. No, it has to be done automatically. The other essential is banish zero-sum models. By zero-sum, I mean you can only have one positive gain in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that the two total to a sum of 0. Well, it was never privacy that won over security or data utility, and nor am I suggesting that privacy should win over those other interests, but I sure as heck wasn't going to have it lose out all the time. Zero sum is either or, win-lose. We have to get rid of this. It's so dated. In the next slide, please, I talk about the need to get rid of this either or, win-lose model because it doesn't help anybody. Eventually, it's going to come back to bite you. And I remember when I was at doing my graduate work years ago at the University of Toronto, Anatole Rappaport, who was the creator of game theory, which is what positive sum, zero sum is all about. I just was so in awe of him, and I used to just fawn over him. And I remember asking him once, Professor Rappaport, why do people embrace zero-sum models? I'm the eternal optimist. I want to have both interests, not just one versus the other. And he said, Anne, it's simple. Zero-sum is the lazy man's way out. It's much easier just to have one positive gain over the other, but it's short-lived. Positive sum, 2 positive gains at the same time is a much better outcome, win-win. In the next slide, that's what I ask people to do now. I talk about the power of and. Get rid of one interest versus another and say one interest and another, privacy and security, privacy and data utility. And if you create this win-win scenario as opposed to this either or, you will gain enormously. Either or, zero sum involves unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. Bruce Schneier told me that, brilliant data scientist. He's a dear colleague of mine. And he said they're false dichotomies. It's nonsense. You can have both. You just have to spend some time and think it through and make it work. And we can do this. We've been doing this over the years repeatedly. In the next slide, please. I'm going to go over the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design. I'll go through very quickly because I've already covered a number of them. The first one, be proactive. You always want to prevent the harm from arising. Let me spend a moment on the second one, privacy as the default setting. This is a game changer. What this says to people says, no, we don't expect you to search through all the terms of service and all the legalese in the privacy policy in search of the opt-out box, which says do not use my information for any purpose other than the primary purpose of the data collection, which I've consented to. We know nobody does that anymore. It takes too long. It can take hours, and life is short. But let me be clear. Concern for privacy is at an all-time high. In the last 2 years, and all the public opinion polls, Pew Internet Research, etc., concern for privacy has come in at the 90 percentile. 90% very concerned about their privacy. 92% very concerned about loss of control over their personal information. Now, privacy as the default setting flips this on its head, and it says to customers, you don't have to ask for privacy. We give it to you automatically. We are only permitted to use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection, which you consented to. Beyond that, we can't use your information for any other purpose. And if down the road a secondary use arises that we'd like to use your personal information for, we have to come back to you and seek your positive consent. Total game changer. Companies that have become certified for privacy by design have come back and told me this has changed everything. It has built trusted business relationships with their customers, which were lacking before. It is total game changer. And they said it builds trust like no other. And there's such a trust deficit right now. So this will attract customers and give you a competitive advantage over the other guys. Okay, embedded in design, I think I've already spoken about that extensively. Bake it into the code, make it a permanent feature in your design. I won't go over full functionality again. Positive sum is the way to go to multiple positive gains. Get rid of zero sum. It's so yesterday. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of daily hacks and cybersecurity attacks, if you don't have a solid foundation of security from end to end with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So you have to start by ensuring the strength of your security in your operations from end to end. Visibility and transparency, this is so important. So I always like to remind companies and governments who have personal information on us, I always say, look, you may have custody and control over the information on me, but it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to me. So give me a right of transparency so that I know what you have on me. And again, companies have come back to me who have been certified for privacy by design and have told me they love this because it has increased the accuracy of their information. The quality of the data they have is enormously gains by doing this. Because they said, look, we have data on hundreds, thousands of customers. We don't know what's accurate and what's not, but customers do. When they access their own data, they say, no, that's no longer the case. That was the case 2 years ago, now it's this. And they say it has enhanced the quality of our data enormously. So again, another big win. And respect for user privacy. I mean, I could have started with this as my very first principle. When you keep it focused on the user, all of this falls into place. Now, to me, this is like motherhood, but you might be saying, oh, come on, this is, maybe it's interesting, but it's too hard. This can't work in real life. Au contraire. In the next slide, please. We wrote a paper called Operationalizing Privacy by Design, which is actually a compilation of 22 papers written with all the major tech companies. Think of any huge major tech company, Microsoft, Intel, HPE, IBM, Oracle. I know I'm leaving out a number of them, on these 11 areas to show that, yes, you can do privacy and smart meters, privacy and RFIDs, surveillance cameras. Yes, you can do both. Remote home healthcare. Remember, we did a paper with Intel on remote home healthcare. A number with the boomers aging, the aging population, a number of people are living in their homes alone and they want to stay in their home, but they might need some help from time to time. So they embedded sensors throughout the house, all with the positive consent of the individuals living there, of course, to detect things like the following. Let's say you get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, but you don't return within a predetermined period of time. The sensor goes off. You may have had a fall. You might need attention. Sensor goes off in encrypted mode to the 3 parties that you consented to having come and inquire as to how you're doing and to check everything out. This has worked beautifully. People love it. Their privacy remains totally intact, and additional safety measures are brought into place. So take a look at our paper. I think you'll like it. In the next slide, please. This was a letter I got from JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center, just before the end of my last term as commissioner. And I loved it because they said, we've heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy by design. And I love this because I thought, if the Japanese, whose first language is not English, can grasp the importance of positive sum over zero sum, then surely the rest of us can do the same. Now you might be saying, okay, but what's it going to cost me? This is obviously going to have a cost associated with it. Yes, of course it does. But in the next slide, please, I point out to the fact that the cost, if you're proactive and do privacy by design, is tiny. It is a fraction of the cost you will incur if you don't do this and you have a data breach, a privacy infraction. Because these days, they're no longer lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits that are invoked, costing millions of dollars to companies. But the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. The loss of consumer confidence and trust sometimes simply cannot be returned. There was about 4 or 5 years ago, a major retail company in the United States called Target, and a fabulous company. And they started opening up a few stores in Canada, in Toronto, where I live. And we were delighted because Target's a great store to go shopping in. And then, as I said, 4 or 5 years ago, Target had a major breach in the United States. The CEO of Target in the US resigned. The president of Target Canada was fired. And within a few months, all the Target stores that had opened up in Canada shut down. Trust was gone. Everyone was worried about what was going to happen to their information. There was no longer trust, no longer confidence, and it literally shut the stores down. So get smart, get proactive, and make it work for you. In the next slide, please. I know you're all familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation, which came into effect in 2018, although it was years in the making. And the next slide, please. We love this because it has strengthened privacy enormously, increased personal control on the part of the data subjects. But I also loved it because they included my privacy by design as data protection by design into the GDPR. This was huge. And they included privacy as the default, which I mentioned is the second of the 7 foundational principles, which is so critical. This is huge. What a game changer. Because you see, countries all around the world want to have essential equivalence with whatever law is in effect in the European Union so that they can engage in trade and do business with them. And Canada, for years, had that in place. We had essential equivalence, but no longer, not since the GDPR came into place, because it raised the bar on privacy and data protection, and countries all around the world literally have been amending their laws, upgrading them in order to become essentially equivalent with the GDPR. In the next slide, please. Now, I would not go so far as to say this, but they, the information age said that it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. I would not go that far at all because there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But I think the point they're trying to make here is that if you follow privacy by design, you raise the bar so dramatically across all of your policies and practices in your company that you will most likely end up meeting the other requirements of the GDPR as well. So very important. Everyone's trying to get essential equivalence to the GDPR, strengthening their privacy laws. In the next slide, please. The same thing happened in Canada. Our federal privacy commissioner at that time, just before the GDPR came into effect, wrote to the federal government and said, look, we've got to upgrade our privacy laws. We need more transparency, accountability, and we need to integrate approaches like privacy by design into the law because, after all, they added this into the GDPR in Europe, and it was created by a Canadian in Kavukian, so we've got to do it here. In the next slide, please. We were at first very optimistic because the federal government, in response to the commissioner's comments, issued a paper called Towards Privacy by Design, How to Review and Update Our Federal Private Sector Legislation. Great. We were all very excited about this. Never get excited just based on what somebody says, especially in government. They got to walk their talk, and they haven't walked their talk at all. They just released a bill a few months ago, Bill C-11, which is horrible, and hopefully will not come into effect. Anyway, I digress. I'm not going to focus on that. Let's stay positive. In the next slide, please. We've been offering privacy by design certification in partnership with KPMG because companies have been demanding it. And they say, look, we gain a competitive advantage by doing privacy by design. So we're delighted. We've done so many of these. And in the next slide, please. We've also, I offer a course at Ryerson University on privacy by design, the global privacy framework, because everyone's been asking about it. And something new, in the next slide, please, we just started offering a new course that I launched this spring called Trust by Design. So many companies have come to me and said, trust is lacking. Consumers do not trust us anymore. They simply, they won't believe what we're saying. We need to embed trust. We need strong, trusted business relationships. And so it should come as no surprise, since there is such a massive trust deficit. And you can go here if you have any interest in taking the course. Just take a look at this. And I want to stop for a moment before I continue and mention one other thing that literally just happened. I don't have a slide on it. I've been doing some work in India on the very unfortunate practice of the government of India about wanting to have almost the equivalent of a crypto backdoor imposed in India. What a backdoor does, if you have end-to-end encryption, for example, I'm going to use the example of WhatsApp. WhatsApp has end-to-end encryption, and people who use it are very confident that their privacy remains intact, their data remains private. But now, with India introducing this legislation that they're saying, no, we want to be able to, they don't use the words break into, but that's in effect what they're doing, breaking into the end-to-end encryption so they can get the identity and the email, etc., of the sender of the email, where it originates, where it progresses, and so many inferences can be made based on that. It is appalling. And what I'm delighted with, and this just happened, I think, yesterday or the day before, WhatsApp, which is with Facebook, they've launched a lawsuit against the India government saying, this is crazy. You can't introduce this almost equivalent of a backdoor and demand that our end-to-end encryption, which is what customers want, that be broken into at the first email being sent out by the sender. So I'm delighted. In India, I'm hoping that this lawsuit will get a lot of interest on the part of the public as to what's happening and how completely unacceptable this is. You should be able to have completely private and secure communications from end to end with no government breaking into it. If you need any help, call me. Just email me, because I really object to that. Okay, in the next slide, I'm going to switch for my last few slides to the COVID-19 pandemic we have, and in the push that started with contact tracing. In the next slide, I was delighted with this last year. 300 of the world's leading experts, epidemiologists, doctors, scientists from 26 countries all around the world, they signed a joint letter to their governments and saying, unless governments build contact tracing technology in a privacy protective manner, it will fail, full stop. They said such apps can easily be repurposed to enable unwarranted discrimination and surveillance, and we can't have that. It's absolutely critical that we do not create a tool that enables large-scale data collection on the entire population now or anytime in the future. I was so delighted with this. This appeared in The Guardian, and it was just amazing. And another letter, second open letter, in the next slide, please, was written in the UK by 177 cybersecurity experts, warning the British government that their UK contact tracing app could easily be used to surveil people even after the pandemic had ended. And this is why we need to listen to these brilliant doctors, epidemiologists, cybersecurity experts. You cannot do this. Now, the good news is, in the next slide, Apple and Google partnered together to develop an API, which is amazing. And it's not I was going to say it's a contact tracing app. It's not contact tracing. They call it exposure notification API. What it does is, if your government adopts this, you can download the Apple Google framework, and nobody will know that you've downloaded it. There's no information connected to you, and it will alert you if you come within 2 meters or 6 feet of someone who has tested positive for COVID. And Apple knows me very well. They called me on 2 separate occasions because they know I like to look under the hood. I always like to, trust but verify. They walked me through all of the code, and it is amazing. It is not privacy invasive at all. It's totally privacy protected. So I've been supporting this. I worked with our government here in Ontario, Canada, to develop our Google, our COVID alert, which was based on the Apple Google API. And all of Canada is now using it, and it is completely privacy protective. And the UK, they're using it now, so is Australia and a number of other countries. It's absolutely essential we preserve privacy during a pandemic, before, after, it doesn't matter. Remember, it's not zero sum. You can't put privacy on hold just because there's a pandemic and we need to do things to address it. The pandemic will end. Privacy has to continue, always. You can do both. I'm fearful, though. In the next slide, please. There's a big push now to vaccine passports. And I'm very worried. Here's a quote that I would have quoted the individual, but there was no one linked to this. They said it's setting up a national caste system and a spying apparatus unlike anything in our history. Can you imagine? Next slide, please. Will vaccine passports become mandatory? And you see, governments should not be permitted, as they said, to sidestep our Charter of Rights for the creation of a discriminatory regime simply by claiming, well, they don't know what the government's doing. I mean, people are going to do these things. No. Vaccine passports, see, what they will do is they will create a geolocation system where you will be tracked easily. So let's say when you travel, you're flying somewhere, they demand a vaccine passport. So you go on the plane, you show them your vaccine passport, they let you on the plane. The inferences that can be made from all of these type of travels and lots of organizations like concerts and football games and all these different entertainment places are now saying they're going to require vaccine passports. So all over the world, anywhere that requires a vaccine passport, inferences can be made that any people entering into those premises or flying on those planes, that they have vaccine passports. And this is health information, should not belong to anyone else other than yourself. It is truly, truly appalling. The next slide, please. And already in the UK, there's privacy criticism for the kind of passport plans that are coming out. The British and the Europeans plan to develop these passports and let businesses reopen safely, they're saying. But both privacy advocates and businesses are warning about how invasive and onerous these can be. I can't emphasize this to you enough. This will create such surveillance all around the world that we have never experienced before. In the next slide, please. A little bit of good news, but it is little. I'm working with ID 2020. They're creating something called the Good Health Pass Collaborative, which literally is as privacy protective as possible in terms of the fact that you have a vaccine passport. So it would live on your mobile device. It would be totally decentralized. So no one would gain access to this. Of course, you have to show it when you're trying to get onto a plane, for example, and they would see you have a vaccine passport, but they would not be able to collect the data or retain it. It resides with you. And there are a number of other features. In the next slide, please. Both privacy and data security are embedded, trust, user control, choice and consent, of course. We've tried to incorporate all of these features. And in the next slide, please, both privacy by design and privacy as the default have also been included in this. But, and I'm delighted with that, but the point I want to make is that regardless, inferences can be made if you are permitted to fly on a plane or enter into a stadium, which requires a vaccine passport in order to gain entry. These inferences can be made regardless of the fact that there's no centralized data collection of your information. So I'm very, very concerned about this, and I sincerely hope we can do something about it. In the next slide, please, I'm going to conclude just by reminding you that both privacy and security risks are best managed by being proactive. If you proactively embed the principles of privacy by design, you can prevent, largely speaking, many of the privacy harms from arising. Data breaches, for example. It leads to such a reduction in privacy infringement. And that's why I always like to focus on prevention. It's not only easier, but it's much more cost effective to build in privacy and security up front rather than trying to patch it in after the fact. It also reflects the most ethical treatment of personal data. There's so much focus on ethics these days and the ethical treatment of data, and this is by far the most ethical treatment of data you can have. I'll say it one more time, please get rid of zero-sum thinking, either or, win-lose. You can do both. I want you to do both. Privacy and data utility, privacy and security, privacy and marketing. Believe it or not, the Canadian Marketing Association of Canada invites me to be their keynote speaker at their annual conference every year. I always start by saying, I'm sure I'm the least popular speaker here today. And fortunately, they laugh and they say, yeah, but we know we have to hear what you have to say. So let's get smart, lead with privacy by design, and avoid privacy by disaster, where you have the regulator come knocking on your door. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And the next slide, my last slide, please. I'll just let you know that if you want to contact me, you can email me, or if you have any interest, I don't know if you follow Twitter, I tweet every morning the latest stories of the day from 5 to 6 in the morning. My husband is a saint, but I like to do that because there's new stories developing every day and I tweet this out. So if you have any interest, you can follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much for your time.
Srinivas Rajesh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Always a delight hearing your thoughts.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. Srini, over to you.
Thank you, Anne. It was an extremely interesting session we had, information packed, and the whole world looks at privacy by design and they remember you and your concepts you proposed. In fact, one of the challenges we face, and we came across this whole day, we went into similar concepts on PBD and anonymization and all that, is that unlike security in case of privacy, the functional requirements get in conflict with some of the principles like data minimization, transparency, keeping data empowerment to the individual. Some of these things are not very friendly for organizations which want to consume data and make money. So make profit is the motive. So that makes it a little bit challenging, and lack of technological tools. We have a long way to go in my view. But I think what in looking back 3 decades ago, and what quality used to be, where defects were very high, and then I remember Juran was the one, I think, mainly who introduced this concept of quality by design. I think pharma companies used to adopt. So, and then of course similar thing in by Taguchi, by Deming. And several other, Japan was adopting it. So all this made quality a very, very important concept where the defects used to come down. So I think you did to the world on privacy what Juran did on quality. So with that, I would like to thank you once again. Over to Rajesh.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne. And it was great to have you here. We look forward to stay in touch, and probably, there's a lot to learn, and you continue with that same, it's just that as if it looked like right now is still the privacy commissioner in Canada, and you have the same spirit and same, it's a great, because that's why I pronounced you as a great visionary, because you brought something into a concept, into a legal subject, and made that converted and acceptable from the entire community, and that's really great. And we really look forward, to get much and more insights from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajesh. And please let me know if in India you need any help.
Sure, definitely. Definitely. You are the one-go person. No doubt.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of this session. So it is a great opportunity. We had around 12 sessions with 28 speakers, senior industry leaders, and it has been great to hear from everyone. I'd just like to call upon Srinivas the Chief Global Privacy Officer for Infosys, and Peter Yort, the Director at IAPP, to give the final vote of thanks. Thank you. So it's great to have. So we have come to the end of the sessions. Interesting speakers from senior industry leaders in the privacy community. So we would like to. I would like to call upon Srinivas, the Chief Global Privacy Officer for Infosys, to provide his vote of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Rajesh. Yeah. Thank you all for this information-packed 3-day session. I think we had extremely useful sessions with eminent speakers from all over the world. Of course, there is never an end to the learning process, but we did cover an exhaustive set of topics in these 3 days. And initially, in fact, we were having apprehensions whether will we be able to do a 3-day program. We were actually quite some time, and Peter also will agree, Rajesh, myself, all we were thinking of making it 1 day, maybe at best 2 days, and I was really surprised that we could sustain this for 3 days with such a engagement level. I think that the peak I recall from my team members that we had about 600 plus people participating from all over the world. So that demonstrates how useful this is, and I think we should do more of these sessions as we go along, whether it's Infosys or others, purely for knowledge sharing. And like to look for more opportunities in collaborating with IAPP. So I'd like to thank IAPP, Trevor, Peter, Richard, Tori, and entire IAPP team who made this happen proactively by engaging and helping us to find speakers, making arrangements. I would like to thank all the participants who, without whom we could not have done this, and all the speakers from all over the world who took out the valuable time to do these sessions for the purely with no motive of profit, but for the motive of knowledge sharing. That's what I think the world requires now. We need to share knowledge. Only then we can benefit from it. I would also like to thank at the end the entire team which provided this, made arrangements for the conference, the infrastructure, the from Infosys, who are from the Meridian team, what we call Thiru is the head of that, and entire his team, marketing team headed by Sumit and his entire team members. And lastly, it could not have happened without the entire support from Rajesh for driving this. Rajesh and his team, I think, had put a relentless effort in last couple of weeks, in fact, more than 2 months, but last 2-3 weeks. It requires a huge amount of effort, as we know, to do such a big event coordinating. I would like to thank all of you once again for making a event success, and look forward to more such events in the time to come. Over to you, Peter.
Great, thanks so much, Srini. This was a fantastic 3 days, and while I didn't get to see all of the sessions, I was able to tune into some, and it was and I'm glad that they're going to be recorded. So thank you, Srini, thank you, Rajesh. Your determination in getting this off the ground is just fascinating, fantastic, and look at all the speakers that you brought together. So that was incredible. We started off with that panel with Srini moderating with Trevor and the CRO of Infosys. That was what a great discussion. Trevor bringing up the analogy of consent and how that's kind of an outmoded concept, the way we're handling that now, and likened it to turning on electricity via your wall switch, and how you don't seek to have consent when you do that. And closing out with Dr. Kavukian, wow, that was incredible, and I'm sure she is one of the most popular speakers in the privacy community. So that was pretty cool. Definitely enjoyed that. And I loved how the diversity of the sessions, how we brought together concepts like AI and how an ethical approach to AI doesn't necessarily, that means that that the future can be bright. The future doesn't have to be dystopian. And that's the importance of the work that privacy pros are doing and the role that the IAPP plays in that. I think we play a vital role. We're proud to partner and collaborate with Infosys. We look forward to doing more in the future like this. I think we see how privacy, that while the law is the foundation for it, that there are what at the IAPP we refer to as the adjacent professions. So engineering, finance, HR, all of these disciplines, all of these components of the enterprise need to take privacy into account, because as Dr. Kavukian showed in her presentation, privacy is adds value, and the doing privacy by disaster should not be an option. And I love that concept of avoiding privacy by disaster. It's a way, I think, that everyone in an enterprise has a stake in privacy. So the future is growing for privacy. We know that the profession needs more individuals that are involved, and that's really where the IAPP can play a role. And we're really proud to do this, to have done this collaboration with everyone at Infosys, with all the speakers. I'd again like to really thank Srini and Rajesh for doing this, as well as my colleagues Tori Bell and Rick Habib. So we're really, I invite everyone out there to connect with me on LinkedIn. Contact me if you'd like to know more about the IAPP and how we are the community for privacy, and just so important to be able to bring all this to the world. So thank you. And back over to you.
Thank you very much, Srini. Thank you very much, Peter. I would definitely like to take that as a kind of a pre-approval to do such more programs. Hopefully the budget is made available. I'll take that as a sign off. And Peter, really, thanks. I know when we had this crazy idea, I could literally see the eyes opening up. But however, thanks to your support, Tori's support, more importantly, Richard, for that support, in spite of being on a vacation and extending all the support in terms of trying to find, because the expectations to have the speakers to meet a kind of an agenda which we had more in terms of knowledge transition. We wanted speakers who come and who can talk practical insights, and I think this particular objective was able to be achieved. So I would like to thank IAPP for that, for all that support and believing in us. And to all, as Srini said, I would like to second him, to all the people who are supported in this entire, right from the marketing team, the ETA team, which is owning the Meridian tool, the Paul and his team from the vendors who are helping in this entire broadcasting services, and more all the audiences. Sincere thanks, and we look forward to connect on these kinds of topics more in the future. Until then, take care, stay safe, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.